Hi everyone, good evening.
It's been a long time. I just found out.
I know that Kim is ready in the BevCam booth. Thank you, Kim. And so before we officially call the meeting to order, as is our habit, I will just run through what we have in front of us this evening. We have quite a few items that are going to be kind of moving pieces, so we'll just talk it through. We are going to start off with, we do have a presentation, in fact, just one. Our first scheduled presentation from the Family Promise Executive Director, Rachel Hand, will happen in the fall. Rachel is sick tonight. So if Rachel is watching, we hope she feels better soon. We have some citizen speakers. We do have some public hearings to take care of. We have routine business that we'll work through and then take a break for some committee work and then come back to hear reports from committees and act on some of that business this evening. So with that, I will officially call to order this regular meeting of the Beverly City Council, Tuesday, June 20th, 2023, 7 o'clock p.m. Ms. Kent, will you please call the roll?
Bowen? Here. Crowley?
Here.
Feldman? Here. Hausman?
Here.
Rand?
Here.
Rotundo?
Here.
St. Hilaire?
Here.
Sweeney?
Here.
And Flowers.
Here. Thank you, Ms. Kent. I would ask Councilor St. Hilaire if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and if everyone would please remain standing for a moment of silence in honor of retired Beverly firefighter David Lavadier, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilor St. Hilaire, and thank you everyone for observing that moment of silence in memory and in honor of retired firefighter David Lavadier. Certainly, we are grateful for his years of service to our Beverly community, and Chief O'Connor, I know you're here tonight, and just our condolences and our thanks to you and all of your team as well. Councilors, I would entertain a motion so that our citizen speakers and maybe feel free to stay if they would like, but also go if they would like. Because we have this presentation spot that Family Promise would have been occupying, a motion to take the agenda out of order so we can go right to our citizen speakers.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So that brings us to our citizen speakers at a time much quicker than I think they were anticipating. The first citizen speaker who we have listed, and as a reminder to those who may be watching, you can sign up for these spots at any of our regular meetings. There are 3 available at any given regular meeting of the City Council, and they all are a time frame of up to 5 minutes for each speaker, and you do that by contacting our City Clerk, Lisa Kent, no later than 9:30 the morning of the meeting, and she will let you know if there's a spot available. So Carol Rain, you were the first person to sign up. I'll invite you to go to the podium, and if you would begin with your name and address for the record, and then you have up to 5 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. I'm Carol Rain at 27 Pratt Avenue, and this will be less than 5 minutes. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Nomkeg people, as the land we're currently on was their ancestral lands until disease, war, slavery, and colonization displaced them from their homeland. The Nomkeg people were part of the Massachusetts Alliance, and their descendants are now included in the many tribal nations across the Northeast. As we in Beverly move toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, many here acknowledge our need to decolonize our systems by including Indigenous people and their perspectives within our staff and our leadership teams. I recognize our obligations to this land and to the Indigenous people who cared for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rain, and thank you for being here with us. I usually say at the beginning of this time also for those watching that the citizen speaker spot is not one where the councilors have a chance to have a dialogue back and forth, so you won't see us responding, but it doesn't mean that we're not listening and taking seriously what people are coming to share with us, and so thank you for being here and for your time and your words. I see that our second speaker, Lorinda Visnick, is already at the podium. Ms. Visnick, I will ask the same of you if you could state your name and address for the record, and then you have up to 5 minutes to address us.
Thank you, Madam President. Lorinda Visnick, 39 Middlebury Lane. I, too, shall be way below the 5-minute mark, at least in part because I'm not nearly as prepared to be as wordy as I wish I could be this evening, which is going to be a little ironic when you hear what I wish to try to say. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. Last week, we heard Mr. Drake speak to his passion for the role in our school system. I need to back up and say I'm speaking on my own behalf, not on behalf of the school system or the school committee. I apologize for taking that right out of order. So we heard Mr. Drake speak about his passion for his role in our school system, and he also spoke to the importance of attending the meetings like this and speaking up, regardless of how, and I quote, mundane or intimidating the meetings might be. To that end, I wish to be intentional in thanking Mr. Drake and all those who speak at public meetings. Thank you, Carol, for reading the land acknowledgement this evening. And thank you to our DEIB director for having the land acknowledgement read at the last few events that have taken place right outside this building. Words matter. We often hear people say that you cannot just talk the talk, you need to walk the walk. But we have to start somewhere. And this evening I wish to speak to exactly that, starting somewhere, starting to talk and to be intentional with our words, because words do matter. I have somewhat struggled with reading the land acknowledgement. As many of you know, I've stood here and I've read it at any given one of your meetings, and it is not lost on me that the land acknowledgement is not read at the school committee meetings. Maybe some of you have noticed that. But this week in particular, I have an architect for a child, and I have an architect for a niece, and I have an architect as a brother-in-law. And I was sent some articles in the architecture world about language. And so some of you may live in a house with a master bedroom. And there is a real push in the field of architecture to remove that language. And it's not because it's not politically correct. It's about making people feel that they belong. And so you might not have a problem with that language, and you might not think others have a problem with that language, but we need to channel our empathy and realize that it does, in fact, make others feel uncomfortable when language such as that is used. In reading that architecture article, it linked off to a computer nerd article, which I personally got all excited about. And in the computer world, we often use the term master-slave. One computer is in charge, and the other computer is hanging out, waiting to be told what to do. We also have, in the world of IT, a term called the whitelist. It's a security term. If I want to secure a machine, I make a list of what other machines are allowed to come in and communicate with the important machine, and that list is called a whitelist. But in fact, recently a developer took the initiative in a piece of shared public code and changed that term from whitelist to allowed list. It was a small change, but it made an impact on some number of other people. And for her effort, notice the pronoun I used there. Computer science is a very male-dominated industry. For her effort in changing that wording to be more intentional, to be more inclusive and less offensive to some, she was vilified. And there was a lot of conversation in the computer science world around free speech. And I should be able to use whitelist or blacklist or master-slave because that's my freedom of speech. But words matter. And so this evening, I really wish to ask this body to be intentional in your words and to reconsider your reading of the land acknowledgement to start your meetings, rather than have someone like myself or Carol or any number of the other citizens who have come up to do so because we understand and believe that it is important to be intentional in our words and to make that outreach to make others feel included. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Visnick, for being here and for your time as well and for your words. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the other members of city staff and leadership who are here before we jump into our presentation, counselors. And again, thank you to both our citizen speakers. Thank you to those who may be watching, considering signing up at upcoming meetings. Your time, your words, they're always appreciated and very valuable in this space. So I have already acknowledged, but want to again, I did it sort of as we were passing by, but Chief O'Connor, our fire chief, is here with us. Thank you for being here, Chief. Our City Finance Director, Brian Ailes, is here with us this evening. Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Our City Council Budget Analyst, Sherry Perry, is here with us as well. And of course, His Honor the Mayor, Michael Cahill, is here with us. Thank you very much, Mayor, for being here. And although she was just speaking as a citizen in her familiar seat, we do have Ward 6 School Committee Member Lorinda Visnick. Now that you're back in your familiar seat, I assume you're back to being School Committee Member Lorinda Visnick. So with that, let's go right to our first scheduled presentation, now our only scheduled presentation, I guess. And this is a presentation from Anthony DeLuzio and other project and design leaders to come and discuss with us some of the updates about the City Hall project. And Mayor, I don't know if you'd like to get things started.
Sure. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you.
And thank you to our team for being here tonight. So in just a minute, I'll turn it over to the architectural team from Feingold. But I first want to say Tony DeLuzio from Colliers couldn't be here tonight, our project manager, but his colleague Chad Healy is here with us. So Chad, thank you for being here. They are the project manager on the City Hall project, and we have Tony and Megan and Laura who will introduce themselves in a minute and walk you through the alternatives at present for the City Hall project. I just want to say that some of the rationale for this City Hall renovation and doing something with the old police station are as follows, just to keep in mind. One, City Hall itself hasn't had a renovation in almost 100 years. Two, we have no HVAC system on the first and second floors, and one on the third floor that needs to be replaced. And three, we have whole city departments that have been off campus for years for lack of space here, inspectional services and health in particular. Health has been sharing space over at the senior center, space that our growing senior population is going to need more and more. And as you counselors know, and some members of the public know from spending time in here, several of our departments are in really tight spaces that were problematic before COVID, and that really highlighted just how difficult it has been to work in tight spaces. So that's some of the rationale for this project. Why don't I, Madam President, just turn it over to the Feingold team, and I know they'll walk you through a brief presentation and then give councilors a chance to have some reaction and questions and thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, one other thing, I'm sorry. We have some of our Permanent Building Committee members are watching at home. Mr. Bruce McDonald on the Permanent Building Committee is here with us. They were all invited, and as I said, some of them I know are watching from home and are kind of following along with this as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. McDonald, for being here with us in person. Thanks to everybody who's watching. And so I will invite the team to get started, whoever would like to speak first. And I will just mention, just so it doesn't seem rude at the time, if we get around to 8 o'clock and we're not quite done, I will just need to pause us to open a posted public hearing. If we're not quite done, we can recess that, but I will need to interrupt us, and sometimes that can seem rude, so I want to let you know. So thank you.
Is it okay if we present from here? Would that be okay from you?
Yes, I think as long as whoever's speaking is close enough to a microphone so folks on BevCam can hear, that is more than fine.
And it looks as though we're not able to get it up on the screen. I'm not sure what that connection. Yeah, absolutely. It's worked every other time we've presented on that screen.
Mr. Ailes doubling his tech support.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No.
I'll play with a couple of the inputs and maybe
It's going to be a little small on the TVs. I'm sorry. And we can obviously share the presentation for later. But as Mayor Cahill was so kind to say, we are from Feingold Alexander Architects. I know we've met a few of you through the interviews with the for the project program. I am Laura Fott. I am the project manager for Feingold Alexander, and
Great to be here tonight. My name is Tony Sean. I'm the Principal Director of Design at Feingold Alexander.
Great. And I'm Megan Hoover, Project Architect. I think we've met most of you along the way and excited to show you what we have today.
So as you're all very familiar with the building, we'll move quickly into this, and starting with what we heard through these interviews, both with you all and with the staff, and really understanding what the building means to you, both through honoring it in its historic character, but transforming it so it is a modern and functioning and technological building. So, knowing that it needs to be welcoming and accessible, and again, honoring that character of your city and the space, this beautiful building of which you're housed. We want to make sure that both the staff and the public feel very safe and secure as they're working in the space or interacting. And then knowing that the departments themselves have some space constraints or overly generous spaces, or spaces that just are not contiguous to their counterparts. So understanding what those are have been a large portion of what we've done in our interviews. Sustainability is a huge goal of the city, which is a wonderful, wonderful primary part of our design, and making sure that we're flexible for the future, knowing that the space is going to be here for decades to come as it has been in the past. So making sure that it can flow and flex with that, and obviously needing to accommodate the hybrid nature of meetings today so that you are able to, again, to be flexible and mobile as we move forward. So I will let Megan walk you through the programming, because I know this is a lot.
Right, and so this chart is an attempt to break down our weeks-long effort of coming here, meeting with each department, meeting with you all, and understanding space needs for everybody. As you can see by the chart, like we mentioned, it is a bit small to see, but we mapped out what we have existing based on existing drawings and blueprints. And then by speaking with each one of you and each department member, we were able to quantify and calculate how much space we're going to be projecting in the new design. So the way we broke down the space is we took the total building area, we separated it into department work areas and to building common shared areas, and also utility and support spaces. And from the total department areas, we broke it down into each department. You'll see these colors translated into floor plan diagrams as we move forward. Long story short, what we're looking at is projected space. The total square footage of City Hall, just this building right now, is about 24,410 gross square feet. With the police station attached, we're looking at something around 35,000 square feet. And what we're projecting through our interviews and quantifications is something closer to 42,000 gross square feet. So we can see pretty quickly that we don't quite have enough space here. And that's what led us into our design options with that knowledge. And so I'll hand it to Laura to kind of run through the preliminary options.
So staying at a very high level, we looked at three primary options, taking into account the buildings themselves. So again, we know this is very small. So the first diagram is just your existing buildings, both the Cabot House and then the police station, the former police station. And as Megan noted, that's about 35,000 square feet. Option one, we broke it down into these options 1, 2, you're going to see 2 as an A and a B, and we'll explain that in a moment, and then 3, and those have primary changes to each. So option 1 is keeping the Cabot House and the primary police station, but adding on top of the former police station to allow us that square footage, to make up that square footage that we need. Option 2, we are taking the police station down to its foundation and building a new space on top of that. Retaining the foundation gives us a few items. It allows us to hold the embodied energy of concrete, the concrete foundation. It allows us to stay within that footprint that's already there, not undermining the very close zero lot line of the cemetery beyond, but also allows us to correct the floor levels. As you may know, the police station does not align floor levels with this building. So we lost in option 1s, we lost some efficiency efficiencies by adding lifts and ramps, and it really just becomes difficult. And then option 3 is the more blue sky. This is what do we get if we don't hold ourselves to that footprint. So taking down the former police station and then bringing a full new foundation and full new building on top of that. And so we're going to dig into each of these in more depth, but that's just the kind of 3 buckets that we looked at.
Right, and so just running through this quickly, we do want to address that we did look at an option where we just renovated this building and the former police station. As I mentioned before, there's not quite enough space. So because of that, we outruled this option pretty quickly. What that means is if we were to go with this option, the inspections department and the health department, which are currently off-site, wouldn't be able to come into the building. We wouldn't have enough space for the long-term storage that's currently in the basement. And maybe 1 or 2 departments would still have to reside down there, which we know is not an ideal scenario. So we outruled this option pretty quickly, and we'd like to focus on the options where we can accommodate everyone above grade. So option 1B, like Laura mentioned, this is a scenario where we're renovating the police station, we're expanding the 2nd level, and we're building an additional level on top of it. That allows us to accommodate everybody above grade, which is great. But there are some complications that come with that. Adding a level to the police station, some pretty significant structural implications there that we're going to have to explore more. Meeting the new energy codes might be a bit complicated because of the condition of the police station's envelope. It does bring up some accessibility issues. Laura mentioned the difference in floor levels, so we're going to have to pull some gymnastics to figure that out. Also in this scenario, we are looking at locating the main entrance to the building at the historic main entrance like it is now, and that also might bring up some accessibility issues due to the distance from the parking lot for older constituents. So nevertheless, we did, Laura, I'm not sure how to go back. Oh, there we go. So we did lay out what it would look like if we were to pursue this option. For reference, this rectangle is the building we're in now. I think my mouse is showing up on the screen. No, it's not. So the rectangular shape is the building that we are currently in, and sort of the non-rectilinear shape is the police station attached to the current city hall up in the upper right-hand corner. Like I said, the main entrance in this scenario would be located at the historic main entrance to the building on Cabot Street. People would come in, the public would come in through that entrance into this shared entry lobby and to this shared public counter. And behind that public counter, it is laid out quite a bit differently than the current City Hall scenario. We have departments laid out behind that shared public counter to maximize adjacencies, so they're not quite as divided by this central corridor. And so departments that are more public facing, the collector, the city clerk, they're more stationed towards the shared public counter, while departments who need less public interaction are stationed more towards the police station side of the building. That theme carries up throughout the floors. We have city council chambers still on the 3rd floor in this scenario. Overall, the departments are laid out floor by floor similarly to how they are here, disbursement-wise, but the layout is quite a bit different, and the way that public interaction takes place is also quite a bit different. So that's how we looked at option 1, and we'll now jump into a scenario where we take down the police station and reuse the foundation.
Sure. We should also note that these are bubble diagrams. These are not walls. Each of those bubbles is not meant to be in bounding space. They don't show corridors. We're not saying that this is someone's office. If it was a single department, it has numbers of spaces. These are just the square footage of that group. So moving on to 2, and knowing we need to move quickly, the 2A and B we're going to group together because both of those scenarios are reusing that foundation, as we mentioned, for the police station, but taking it down to make sure that we have those efficiencies of levels, allow us some leeway in our layout, and just really trying to take the best of the building, but allow us to make a great envelope as well. As Megan noted, we will be meeting our sustainability goals and knowing that we will want a very tight building envelope as well. So a new building envelope above grade will be very helpful. This is a scenario where we walked through each of the floors, and you're going to notice in this we're breaking out A and B. A is on the top of the screen, B is below. You're going to see at the basement level, it's very similar. We're not putting any staff there. We would have a great place for storage, which we know is a need, a long-term storage for the building, and then the mechanical spaces, but not a lot of change between A and B. You start to see the change between options A and B when you get to the first level. Here you see the public space is shown in yellow, as was in the previous option. We either have a single loaded corridor, so a corridor that runs along one side of the building and houses all of the staff to the other. So the public is maintained in that yellow space and having a larger, more interactive public area to one side. Or in B, similar to how you have it now, we call this a double loaded corridor, so a corridor that runs down the center and then has spaces on either side. Each have their positives and negatives. The positive for single loaded being that we are able to keep space contiguous to each other, so departments, and we're able to also control access, so less security points and more control, and allowing more double doors out and things from departments. But B allows more light direct to the staff. Options A and B as we move up, and again, I'm going to move through these very quickly. The layouts for the staff are very similar, just more divided versus less divided, public space for along one side versus center. And I will also note, because we've done this and it's great to be in this space, this is the width of that space. So if you were to do a single loaded corridor, you can very much picture it by just, say, taking the columns on the side. That would maybe be a good place for the corridor. So everything when we're saying inboard of that, it's only really this depth. It's not a really great, huge amount of depth for the building. And then moving to the upper floor, to the third floor, again, you can see in option A, we are showing the city council chambers and the committee rooms in a very similar place to as it is shown now. You can see we've dashed in, it's slightly in there, dashed in of where this current council chambers is located, but given that we are moving the corridor, it shrinks it and it becomes a little more, it doesn't shrink it in size, but just shrinks it from away from the wall and reconfigures it slightly. In option B, we've relocated the same council chambers to what would be the former police station footprint building, because with that, having that corridor through would divide the space in half, as I know you function with now, of people traveling through during meetings. But keeping that contiguous public space would be helpful. So then, parking, we've looked at numbers of options of what the impacts of parking are for each of these options, and really understanding that the parking as it is laid out now is maybe not at fair standards and may need a little more generous turnarounds. And then we'd also, by adding that entry to the directly off the off the parking, we would impact that slightly. So there would be a reduction of parking. So moving to third.
So the third option is if we tear it down and remove the police building, what happens if we put something entirely new? So I'm going to just point out a few key things that result from that. One of the key things is that we can essentially create a quite an efficient design, because we are not prescribed by the limitations of the footprint or the shape. So we can reconfigure it. Number two, this scheme is also proposing that we do relocate the main entrance to where your current parking lot is now. So this becomes really the primary way into City Hall, as opposed to where you currently have. We still retain that historic entrance, but this changes paradigm. And number three is that, and this is a pretty significant one, is we're reconsidering the location of this council chamber. So with that, I think I'm going to just show you quickly. So again, ground floor, very similar. We have stores, mechanical support like in the other schemes. Here we can see on this first level plan, again, the yellow is basically organized, single loaded, it's along the park. So this allows the whole edge to be the public circulation on the ground level. And when we do this, we also address the issue of accessibility into the building. So we're going to come into the new entrance at grade. So there are no steps, there are no ramps leading into the entrance. how we manage that is that we solve the internal ramp and circulation inside the building. So once you come into this area, the sort of large expanded yellow lobby area with the big red arrow, once you move into that, there is a series of some steps and an elevator. This connects to the historic building and the new, so that all of this is resolved internally. And the other major change in this scheme is that it relocates the city council chamber down to the first floor for a couple of considerations. One, if we do that, that means the ability for the public to access it is directly at grade. They do not have to climb up through several stairs and elevators to get to this level. Number two, if the building has evening meetings, you do not need to open the rest of the city hall as a result, because this positioning of this council chamber on the first floor permits you to basically control it and accessing, again, directly at grade. So that's probably the most substantive change in terms of what this idea represents. The image is just simply to the right, upper right is some photograph from a large municipal building in Boston. And the bottom sketch, the freehand one, shows like if you're standing in the new lobby looking along the corridor, facing towards the park, and how this addresses the change in levels between the existing and the new. And then without getting into much details, the other remaining portions of the program basically continues up to level 2 and level 3, as we've seen in other instances. So this is the primary differentiator between option 3. And these last few sketches here, just the ones at the far left is taken off Cabot Street, looking at your current corner view. And you can start to see the new addition starting to emerge on the right. And the sketch on the right is from the parking lot side, looking at the new addition, viewing towards it, again with the city council chamber located on the ground floor. So this is the primary, these are just conceptual sketches and not designs. And again, parking is very simple on these various options.
Again, just a slight impact to the parking as it, pulling by leveling it off with the building, and has pulled it forward slightly more. And then just summarizing, I know you've seen this slide already, but it's a very helpful summary to bring us back to, the option 1, where we would be retaining the former police station building and building up from it to get us that extra square footage. It has some pros and cons. Obviously a pro of saving building materials, but con of differential levels. Option 2s give us, building up. So we're kind of in the middle ground of saving some of that material and some of the building, but building up new from it. But again, allowing us to bring that entrance closer to the parking area, alleviating some of the accessibility and connectivity concerns. And then option 3, building up fully. So we open it up for questions now.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And if you couldn't tell, city councilors figured out that if they watched the BevCam streaming, they could see the screen. So thank you to the city councilors who hacked that system. Kathleen Feldman, thank you. And thank you to BevCam for making that available to us. So councilors, are there questions for the team? Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you all for taking the time to be here and to walk us through this presentation. One thing that I think is going to be a really big determining factor in which option the city ends up leaning towards is the cost of the renovation. I know it's still really early in the process, but at this point, is there one option that's more costly than the other, or do you think they're all going to be relatively in the same ballpark in terms of what it'll cost the city to do any of those 4 options?
I'm realizing I have to come back up to the microphone to answer. Yes, so we're very early on. As we said, these are just bubble diagrams, and it's very hard to get adequate cost estimating at that level. Except we work with cost estimators, both ourselves and Colliers, who are very familiar with the way we work. And so we have taken these to them, and we're working through that. We, at this point, everything is on the table. So, there's always every design process, so we come back with that. But the 3 options, because of adding a story, the option 1 of adding a story on, that adds cost. It seems like you're saving so much, it should be easier, save us some money. But when you're adding structure up through a building, because it's not designed to pick up another floor, it becomes less costly, it becomes more costly than expected. Option 2, you are saving some foundation work, so if that you have some savings there. But using that slightly irregular footprint of the foundation doesn't allow us to be quite as efficient with our space, so we're a little bit larger in that layout. Now, is that something we can refine over time and maybe get back to? Yes. But that one, just given it's a little bit larger, came in a little bit higher than the last. But I think they're all in about, cost per square foot. The last is the most expensive, given it's a new foundation and new buildings. But they were really in about the same range of what we would expect for costs per square foot for a building at this time.
Okay, thank you. And maybe to take that information and kind of repackage the same or similar question, it sounds like in the option 3 scenario where there is essentially a new building built onto the side of what exists, excluding the footprint of what was the police station, doing so which would give the city more flexibility in terms of the space that's ultimately built there, wouldn't actually be that much more costly, and it might actually be less expensive than it would be to try to keep that building in place and work around it. Is that correct?
Especially keeping the building working around it. There are hazardous material, a building of that age is going to need extensive demolition. We're not, it's not a brand new sealed envelope, as I think Megan mentioned with our, the new energy code is amazing. But existing buildings are not excluded from new energy code, so we would have to really make that a very energy efficient building. So it means we're building basically new walls all inside of that, and new, on top. So there's a lot to that. So I don't think I said I'm our sustainability strategist for the office. I really want us to save materials and do great sustainable buildings, and I often want us to save buildings. Tony probably and I, talk about this often. But I think at some points that it's not always great to save, and it's not always cost effective to save that. But yes, I know that's a longer answer than you're probably looking for that.
No, that's all very helpful information, so thank you, guys.
I will add one other comment. On the sustainability side, in those parking scenarios too, we know that doing things in consideration like geothermal, we will have to do substantial impact to the site in any of those scenarios. So that's another factor that comes into play here. But that is its own sort of piece of the puzzle related to any of these options.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All set, Councillor Sweeney?
Yes, Madam President, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rotundo?
Thank you. One's a concern, one's a question. Concern is obviously the reduced parking. We know right now parking's a premium in the area. And I don't know what consideration the mayor or the administration is going to take for that. But the second question is, I know we have square footage, but what is the price tag per square foot that we're looking at? Is it $600 a square foot? Is it $700? Is it $500? Do you have any estimate at least? You got to have some sort of a ballpark figure anyways.
So we do. These are very preliminary, and I wouldn't hold us to it. The ballpark that we use for renovation numbers is, and I think this is what Colliers have been starting with, is, thank you, is approximately $500 a square foot for renovation and $700 for new. That isn't what when we did our cost estimate of this, it came out much better than that, but it's still, those are ballpark and now we can push that up and push that down. That's kind of we can, as the same as we can push up and down the square footages that we're using. There's that priorities list of the spaces of this would be great to have, but we maybe can't afford it. And the same thing can be true for all of our materials.
Just a quick follow-up. So for the new build, if you're talking about the police department, that would be the $700 figure per square foot, if I'm understanding that correctly, and whereas the renovation would be $500, would be City Hall, correct?
So that's the number that Colliers had benchmarked when they were first looking at budgeting it. That's our numbers come in a little bit different because we don't do it as we didn't break them out as in that exact way, as new and old. We do it as a holistic of this is how much doors cost for the whole project. We didn't break it out new to old. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Houseman.
Thank you, Madam President. I have 5 questions, if I may, all related to design. First question I have is, what is the useful life design reference that you're using for the redone building? Is it 25 years, 50 years, 100 years? I mean, this building has now been here, I think, going on 200 years. And it's been used as a city hall for, I don't know, Mayor, do you?
1783, 1820.
Yeah. So I guess I think of it, I think all the questions about cost are directly relevant to our budget, right? But I also think that the time frame in which you sort of amortize the useful life of whatever it is you design is also very relevant as well. So if you're amortizing your per square foot cost over a 5 or 10 year period, it's very different than if you're doing it over another 200-year period. So I think that that's relevant to how we think about the cost and the design. Second question is, even if you took the parking, whatever the version is that maximizes available parking, and I'm not sure who exactly to address this question to, but my guess is that even if you maximize that, it's still not going to give you what percent? What percent of the City Hall staff who would be here on a daily basis would that represent? 50% of the staff would have a parking space? Do we have any notion around that? And that's somewhat of a rhetorical question because it leads to, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It does look like the mayor was prepared to.
Yeah.
Well, since you raised it, and also Councilor Rotundo, I mean, we're in the process of working through the parking, right? I mean, we've never had enough parking here, and we won't when this is done. We will be bringing back 2 departments that are off campus that also have fleets. Okay, so if you look at inspectional services and health and figure they're going to be roughly 10 inspectional vehicles, those are not take-home vehicles, so they're going to need to be parked overnight. They will all be EVs, so we'll need charging capabilities overnight. We've already talked about likely taking those 10 vehicles off campus and utilizing other city-owned, parking capacity for that. As you know, City Hall staff park in the neighborhoods here on a regular basis. We are looking in this new design to try to build in some bicycle and other micro-transit storage space in the building and encouraging people to find other ways of getting here other than, one person per, private vehicle. But with that said, we also are looking and need to look at how to, try to provide additional parking capacity, whether it be through, certainly our own parking inventory, but potentially, on-street parking as people do today, and potentially off-street parking that's controlled by others. But we'll see. We'll see what makes sense as we move through this.
Yeah, so to respond to that, sort of where I was going with it is, I'm going to guess, even if you took the entire section here of all of the green space and converted it to parking, I think we would still probably fall short. And therefore, my own preference would be that we not try to maximize the building design for the next 200 years around today's imagined parking needs. So I would really, value the green space we have, regardless of which one of these we, design for forms we sort of end up with.
Yeah, thanks for that point, because, to be responsible to Feingold's work, they had to show different scenarios, but
sure.
Overwhelmingly, people don't want to lose that green space for the sake of a few parking spaces. We know that we don't have so much green space in this part of downtown, so that's an important, kind of urban oasis in a sense, right? We've got the common and we've got the waterfront, but yeah, this green space next door is important for a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
and hanging on to it really matters.
It'd become a heat island essentially if we used it all for parking. So, different kinds of questions. The disturbance of the police footprint and the concrete and the sustainability issues around that. Do you have to remove the concrete? If you could just speak more about what the challenge is from a sustainability point of view if you disturb that. I mean, I think concrete can be recycled. How do you look at the issues around that aspect of the project, if that's what ends up happening?
So I can answer the first one as well before I forget that one. So we look at buildings as a life cycle analysis often, especially the more sustainability minded we look at, think about it. We tend to use 80 years as the average life of a building. So that is just it's a kind of an industry standard number at this point. Obviously this building has lasted beyond that, but that also takes into account that there have been many substantive changes to this building, extra floor added, taken off, and so that takes some of those pieces into account. So that 80 years is about what we use, and really, yes, absolutely, looking at the life cycle cost for extending that out does make the numbers very different. Embodied energy of concrete. Yes, you can recycle concrete. It's a bit energy intensive to do. We would recycle as many construction materials as we could in any of the demolition of the building. We would do separation, but the creation of concrete, the mining of the materials that are needed, is a very energy intensive. And so, in general, steel, wood, concrete. If you're looking at basic structural materials for buildings, and concrete is considered to be the highest embodied energy, the most energy, most time to pay back of all the structural materials, which is why we try to, in highly sustainable buildings, we try to reduce the amount of concrete we're using or reuse it. So that's why I mention reuse of some of the foundation or all of the foundation helps us in that aspect of thinking of this as a sustainable building and needing less concrete. Even if we recycled the materials, it would still have the embodied energy of the new foundations to be put down.
And if you were to expand the full area of in other words, not be constrained by the existing footprint, could you still use some of the existing concrete foundation? Like the back wall or something like that, the back foundation?
Absolutely, and I don't think I said this in this presentation, and I should have. We consider these designs almost a la carte. You could take bits of one and use them with the other, and so similarly, we are trying to keep it in very bite-sized, understandable, keep this building, take this down, in those three options. But at the end product is usually a combination of many of those ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Just two more, I think, and they both really relate to a sort of more specific design. So the pedestrian access, so I was thinking about I think all of the designs, I didn't have a chance to sort of focus on all of them, but it looks like in all of them, the city council chambers would be first floor over where the police station is that correct? 2 through 3, but not 1, is that?
Only in number 3 did we move it down to the lower floor.
And the others, it would all remain in this location?
On the 3rd floor, but not in this location because we have a corridor that would cut through. So in 2, we would have a corridor on one side, so it shifts over. Okay. In 2B, it moved to the new building in the back because, again, corridor to allow people to go through. So it did shift in those options.
All right. And then my last question really has to do with sort of the specifics of this room and the sense of so as I understand it, your firm in particular focuses on honoring historic buildings and as you go through the renovation process. So acknowledging these are just sketches and so forth, mostly what I saw and I may be wrong because it was there was a lag on BevCam and a small screen and so forth. It looked that the design for the city council chambers was very modern. And I just wonder from your point of view, sort of balancing the desire for a forward-looking building and design with retaining some semblance of the historic nature of this chamber and how it's constructed. I couldn't really tell from the design, but it looked like you're really talking about a redo in a very modern palette, not something that carries any of the nature of this room into the redesign.
I'll see if I can try to answer that. correct. The firm history is really built around adaptive use and been at it over 50 years. So the firm is a precursor to doing with existing buildings. We're very sensitive to this question about adapting and transforming. And there's this fine line that boundaries between old and new. When we do even a historical renovation or preservation, we're often having to really bring it up and modernize. There's many things, and we won't get into details, that we would want to address no matter what design going forward. I think, to your question, I think it's premature right now to really talk about the language until we determine the approach overall that we want to take. And at that point, then the determination as to how we move forward and the character of this room and other things that really, resonate with folks in the community and at this council, we want to pay attention to. So those are the next level of design interventions, but I would hesitate to say it's really premature right now to say it's modern or it's traditional.
We did, and I know, I apologize for the small screen, and there we did show. I think we peppered in a few of more traditional, historic spaces that were. I believe we even used the Cambridge City Council chambers, and which does retain that feel and that gravitas of a space like this. We even relocating the space, the feel wouldn't necessarily need to be lost. And we do honor that there's the history of the space, and there's so much energy and life that has been part of this, that we could reuse, or again, to that recycling portion, we can bring pieces of this to other parts of the building. I will say that most likely we are insulating these walls, and so the walls themselves will need to be we wouldn't, even if we kept it exactly as is, we would maybe need to rethink the space.
All right. What I think I hear you saying is it's really a little too early to have that conversation. I guess perhaps being the oldest of the city councilors, I have some particular attachment to, some of the dioceses that we sit at. It may not be shared by my colleagues, but, bringing forward some of the historic sense of this room, I think is a value worth, considering. So.
Maybe more comfortable benches.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen, and then Councillor Rand, then Councillor St. Hilaire. That's the order I see.
Thank you. So I wanted to just add on to some of the public comment from the meeting the other night, and comments we're hearing again, sort of from that a la carte menu, what's jumping out as most exciting, and then have one question on kind of the planning, if it doesn't disappear from my screen. So yeah, I think really important to keep the green space. That's been covered, sort of the why, but wanted to just re-emphasize that. And I really like the idea of a welcoming entrance from that side of the building without losing the facade, but thinking of that sort of corridor as not just a hallway between working offices, but a welcoming public space and a space you can use for receptions and displays. I think that really gets at the sort of, this is a public space sort of philosophy, and so I think that's really exciting wherever that lands. Also think having the city council chambers and other meeting rooms of various sizes accessible down on the first floor and spread throughout, so that there isn't so much. I mean, I like the idea of being able to sort of wall off the rest of City Hall when you need to, but also that not have that sense of like there's a counter and everything else is inaccessible to you. But really the spaces like this where we're trying to invite people in are front and center, and can be used at all times of day, and not get in the way of work that needs kind of a quiet space, but also doesn't feel that intense sense of separation. So it's nice to see that can happen in a lot of different ways. One question I had about the sort of office space is, in your projections, are you anticipating every city employee in every department working in person all at the same time to estimate that space? Or does this assume some more hybrid models, some use of technology, and sort of making the space flexible as city staffing goes up and down over 80 years?
So based on what we heard, we did ask that question when we met with every department. we asked, who's full-time, who's part-time, who's fully remote. A great majority seem to be in person, so that is what we planned for. By a large percentage, it seemed to be in person. We did accommodate a couple of workstations that would be hybrid, but for the most part, we are planning for in-person because that's what we heard. But.
It is flexible space, though. We do have space planned for future. There is, and by not creating every person's workstation as a private office, that does allow for flexibility. It allows for change, and that is part of a modern design, which we kind of departed from that typical row of offices. There is flexibility to that, but our job is to bring the culture and what we're hearing, not to try to change the way you all work as a whole.
And that's not to say that we wouldn't accommodate the hybrid capabilities. Like, for example, a lot of our meetings nowadays are hybrid, and so every conference room should have that ability to host a hybrid meeting. So the ability is there. I think space-wise, yeah, correct.
Can you just follow up real quick? I guess I was also thinking from the perspective of the cost per square foot and the number of square feet anticipated and the expansion anticipated. Is that driven by needing everybody in person, or would that change if you approach things a little differently?
Right, and I guess that's sort of a question for City Hall and the way they work. The way we've planned for it is in person, but that's not to say that could change, but sort of a conversation for how City Hall employees work.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rand.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for my colleagues' questions. There were some good ones that I checked off my list. I guess I'm just interested in next steps.
So this is part of our feasibility study, the notes, and we have created a draft which is with the city now, and we will be incorporating, the last of our meetings. We'd be incorporating what we hear from here into that. And then along with the cost estimate that we are working through, we would package that up and it's provided to you. Our goal would be to determine of those kind of 3 pathways which is most palatable, and maybe do a little look at this is with the programming, is there hybrid possibilities, can we look at those numbers, and then that gives us a direction forward. This is the program we all agree on, these are the departments that are housed here, this is approximately the amenities and space. And then we start on schematic design. So then we start on the design drawing process, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, having had a lot of projects come before you. But that, we start in earnest on the creating drawings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rand. Councilor St. Hilaire.
I just wanted to note in our capital expenditure plan, it looks like we earmarked $25 million for this project, and I just wanted to confirm that with Mr. Ailes. Is that? And I guess what version of this is that contemplating?
So I believe, without having the capital plan in front of me, if you're looking at the debt schedules in the back of the plan, there's a $25 million debt earmark. In addition to that, there is, I want to say it was $1.25 million, $1.5 million that the council transferred originally as cash on top of that. So that's a target, if you read the narrative, it talks about that being a reasonable target. We think that's still somewhat of a reasonable target, depending upon the next few steps that Ms. Paff laid out, we'll have a better sense of kind of how close we actually are over the next probably weeks to month.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I just wanted to comment also that you mentioned, use the word a la carte, and it got me thinking a little bit about, this is multiple projects, it feels like. The mayor mentioned upgrading the systems, HVAC systems, with the police station, the former police station to deal with, and then we've also got the redesign of current office space. Have we thought about maybe phasing it out or doing it in that way, or is that an option?
It's always an option. Is it a cost savings option? Probably not, because you're now mobilizing a construction crew and things, numbers of ways. Now, it's an option if you were just fitting out a space that was, not touching the envelope, and you could do it floor by floor, or if your systems were broken out floor by floor, but we're wholesale replacing your HVAC systems are not adequate. The electrical services, we always joke that one of the things that, meeting the staff and interviewing everyone was lovely. Everyone is very, no one is asking for the sky. We often get that one person that says, I want a jacuzzi, and we never had anything like that. All we ever had was, I'd really like to be able to turn my toaster and my computer on at the same time. There were very reasonable expectations. And so, changing out those electrical systems and those IT systems are 100% needed, and that is a full building system. You can't do that floor by floor. If you think they run vertically, horizontally, and that means you're opening everything. And as we mentioned, the building will need abatement, and so again, you can't have folks in here while we're abating. It's going to cause a lot of disruption. So phasing is very hard.
Okay, thank you.
All set, Counselor?
Yep.
Thank you. Counselors, we are at 8 o'clock, so just checking if there's any other questions or comments at this point. If not,
One very quick one to follow on that.
yes.
The 30-second version. Are we still on track for the timeline that's been discussed of staff moving out of City Hall sometime next year for about a year and a half? 2 years?
Very roughly, yes, but we are slowly slipping back by meetings as we need. So decisions would need to be expedited to keep us moving on that schedule. But yes, and it's I'm not sure exactly what schedule you all saw, so I don't want to say 100% to that, but in general, yes, that is where we are aiming for.
Thank you. All set, Counselors? All right. Well, with that, we're going to prepare to move to our public hearings, but I will say thank you to the entire team for being here, for presenting to us, and for answering counselors' questions and hearing our feedback here in this public meeting. It's really important, I think, to have these spaces to do that and for members of the public to be able to hear that as well. So thank you to the team. I did make note that I think Kim from BevCam did seem interested in the jacuzzi option, so just something to add to your notes. Thank you all very much. Thank you. We will go right to our 8 o'clock public hearing on Order 171. Ms. Kent.
Order number 171, order that the City Council of the City of Beverly hold a public hearing on Tuesday, June 20th at 8 p.m. at 191 Cabot Street, 3rd floor, Council Chambers, live stream on BevCam, relative to National Grid Plan 305-48817 to install underground electric conduits approximately 65 feet southeast of the center line in the intersection of Cabot and Central Street, continuing approximately 25 feet in a north direction. And this was in the newspaper on June 12th.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. I believe we have our National Grid representative, Michael Kazadi, is here with us. Mr. Kazadi, anything that you would like to, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, so please correct me. Anything that you'd like to say or introduce to us about this plan?
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Kazadi and I'm representing National Grid at 44 River in Beverly. And for this job, we are planning on trenching and installing about 40 feet of conduit from an existing manhole to the customer's property.
Thank you. Councilors, are there questions about this plan? Councilor Rand.
Thank you so much. Is this a new or is it a new or expanded service to historic Beverly? Is that?
So the owner of 117 Cabot is upgrading their electrical service, so they're gonna get fed from a new direction. So we're gonna have to trench and install a new way to feed them power, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. Quick follow-up. Does that mean are you removing an old line, or is this?
Yes, we'll be removing the old line. Yep.
Okay. And last question, please. Do you have a set start and end time for when this might happen?
It's whenever the customer lets us know when they're ready, and our crew will go out there and do the work.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilor Rand. Councilor Houseman, and then we'll go to Councilor Rotundo.
Counselor Rand asked my questions already, so.
Very efficient work, councilors. Counselor Rotundo.
What's the typical duration of a time of a dig of this nature? When the customer does ask for it to be done, how long is it done within the day? Does it take a couple of days?
It's usually, I say 1 to 2 days.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions or comments from members of the council on this one? Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak in the public hearing on Order 171? This is also a good time for me to mention that for any of tonight's public hearings, members of the public can sign up on the sheets in front of our city clerk, Ms. Kent, and you can do that at any point during the public hearing time. Seeing none, I'll close this public hearing and refer this back to the Subcommittee on Public Services to take action on this evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Kazadi. Ms. Kent, we have a little bit of time before we come to our next public hearing, so let's go to acceptance of minutes of previous meetings. Councilors, we have 5 sets of meeting minutes that we can approve this evening. One from our Finance and Property meeting from May 30th, 2023. From another set from our Finance and Property Committee meeting, June 1st, 2023. The third from our regular City Council meeting, June 5th, 2023. The fourth from our Public Services Subcommittee meeting on June 12th, 2023. And the fifth from our Special City Council meeting, June 13th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve these sets of minutes?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and those are approved. Let's go to communications from His Honor the Mayor, please, Ms. Kent.
Order number 173. Dear Honorable City Council, I am pleased to inform you that the City of Beverly has received a $10,000 donation from One Stop Harm Reduction Program via the North Shore Health Project. The donation will be used by the Beverly Police Department's Community Impact Unit, CIU, to address substance abuse reduction for the following efforts: opiate trainings for the community and rank and file officers, naloxone training for residents and businesses, purchase equipment used by CIU, radios, office supplies, costs for literature and handouts, overtime costs associated with trainings, overtime costs associated with door knocks and community outreach by officers. Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53A requires both City Council and Mayor approval before any grant, earmark, donation, or gifts to the city can be extended for their prescribed purpose. I therefore request the City Council approve this donation by acting on this matter at your upcoming meeting. Sincerely yours, Michael P. Cahill, Mayor.
Thank you. Please refer that to the Subcommittee on Finance and Property. Let's go to communications from other city officers and boards, please, Ms. Kent.
Order number 174 from the City Clerk. A letter to re-elect Christine Dixon to be Clerk of Committees per City Charter. And this is a 3-year term.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. We can actually take this one on the floor, councilors, if there's a motion to approve Order 174.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments on this one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and thank you to Ms. Dixon for her excellent work as our Clerk of Committees.
Order number 175, the City Clerk, a new application for a temporary hawkers and peddlers license from Mary Penta.
Please refer that to the Committee on Legal Affairs.
Order number 176 from the City Clerk, a letter requesting approval for police details at the 2023 municipal elections.
Thank you. We can also take this one on the floor, councilors, if there is a motion to approve Order 176.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments on this one? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0 as well.
Order number 177 from Sergeant Henneberry for the City Ordinance, Section 270-49, amendment to include handicap parking at 12.5 Bow Street.
Please refer that to the Committee on Legal Affairs. Let's go to communications, applications, and petitions, please.
Order number 178 from the Department of Environmental Protection, issuance of waterways license.
I would entertain a motion to receive this and place it on file.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0.
Order number 179 from National Grid, Plan 307-82870, Ober Street, to install electric conduits.
Please refer that to the Committee on Public Services to set a public hearing. Let's go to motions and orders.
Order number 164 from Councilor Rotundo, a proposed ordinance amendment for Article 6, Section 192 regarding lodging house licenses. And I'm not sure how much I have to read of this. Do I read that thing?
Yes, but why don't you hold on that, Ms. Kent, actually, because we're at 8:10.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit lengthy, so we'll come back to that, Councilor Rotundo. But I do want to mention for both our motions and orders tonight, Councilors, these are for first reading, first vote. They'll be for final passage the next time we hear them. But because it's a little bit lengthy and we're at 8:10, I'm going to pause Ms. Kent there, and we will go to our 8:10 public hearing. This is on order number 150, Ms. Kent.
Order number 150, City of Beverly, ordered that the City Council of the City of Beverly hold a public hearing on Tuesday, June 20th at 8:10 p.m. at 191 Cabot Street, 3rd floor, Council Chambers, live stream on BevCam relative to a request for a transfer of $75,000 from the Airport Enterprise Fund balance to fund the continuation of work associated with the testing and monitoring of property at the airport. And this was published in the newspaper on Monday, June 12th.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. If there are members of the public who are here or who are headed here listening on BevCam, you can sign up to speak in this public hearing or any of the following, signing up on the sheets in front of our city clerk. I see that our city finance director, Mr. Ailes, is already at the podium, so Mr. Ailes, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, councilors. The mayor's correspondence pretty much outlined what the request was for, a $75,000 transfer from the Airport Enterprise Fund balance into this project fund. This is similar to actions that we've taken in the past collectively to fund some of the work up there related to testing of the ground and water levels within the airport perimeter. The Enterprise Fund, also noted in Mr. Perry's memo to you, the Enterprise Airport Fund has a balance of $457,335 that was certified at the end of last fiscal year. So there is sufficient funds available to meet this request, and I'd appreciate your approval this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Councilors, are there questions? Councilor Houseman.
Yes, it's not really a financial question, but I would direct it to Mr. Ailes because I think he's our best representative, if not the only representative to speak to this. This is for continuing to fund work to evaluate the PFAS contamination from the airport when it was used in the past. Is that correct?
That's correct. There is some history of some site contamination, mild site contamination, that DEP is requiring regular testing and reporting on.
And who is the LSP that the city has retained for this work?
This is a company called GZA Environmental.
Sure. Yeah. And where can interested citizens find a copy of the most recent LSP report on the status of site contamination and monitoring?
That's a good question. We can certainly make that stuff available upon request. We can, I can check with the LSP to see what types of reports have been filed thus far. We can provide some links to that.
If you could get back to me on that, I'd be interested in taking a look myself.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Let me check with the Airport Commission because they're the ones actually managing the contract and see where that stands.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I'm all set.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Bowen, and then we'll go to Councilor Feldman.
Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on sort of how we budget for this, since it seems to be a recurring expense. And I went back to my notes from the last time we had a transfer in front of us, I think February of last year, for $175,000, and had asked at that time, is this an ongoing expense? Would it be built into annual budgets going forward, or continue to come in this form? And my note from then was that we had contracted using $100,000 transferred from reserves in fiscal year 20, and then we're requesting $175,000 last year, and that total $275,000 was likely to be enough to complete for the filings at that time, or what was expected last year. So I guess curious if this is for a new body of work, or if this is going to be a new request every year for a different amount, or if it could be built in going forward.
Yeah, it's tough for me to say if this is the end of it. It really depends on what the reports wind up saying, and it also depends on the direction that the Airport Commission is going in with, along with this, this environmental service provider. We can certainly provide some additional information, reports regarding what the status is, where the intended kind of end game is. I do know that this 75 is designed specifically to cover this month forward with a slightly expanded scope from what was originally requested with the 175,000. Some additional wells, I think, needed to be drilled and tested beyond what was originally, originally spec'd out.
I'm not sure that I have a follow-up question for that. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Feldman.
Thank you. I have one question, but first to follow up on Councillor Bowen's question. If I remember correctly, about 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't there a grant that was also or a portion of money that was outside of the enterprise fund that helped fund part of the initial phase of this work? I thought there was another source for funding.
It doesn't ring a bell for me.
Okay.
I mean, typically, this type of required testing is borne by the entity.
Okay.
But I don't recall. There may have been something.
Okay. My other question is going to be if the new construction of the pickleball courts at Birch Plains has impacted this study at all, or is anywhere near where this is being studied, because I know that there was the digging into the surface and the membrane and supporting the structure, so just wondering if there was any crossover.
It's my understanding, as the accountant for the city, that they are different, right? I know the area in question related to the testing that's going on, and it's on airport property, behind the perimeter fence. The Birch Plains playing fields is, further up the road.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think they're connected at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Feldman. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. I think I found a way to follow up, which is maybe just if we could get a comment from Mr. Perry on the sustainability of this work. I know it's both required and difficult to predict. And so just would love to hear your thoughts on the overall strategy of bringing these requests as the scope changes. It's a little different than the analysis that there is currently money available for this request. That's good to know, but is a little different than thinking about going forward. Does this seem sustainable?
Thank you, Mr. Perry.
Good evening, councilors. So as you know, I wrote to you last week with a whole bunch of recommendations on all this stuff. I can tell you, as Mr. Ailes indicated, there were sufficient funds for this. I'm going to get to your question in a minute, I promise. In terms of the sustainability or the future, I haven't really looked into it too much, but I think Mr. Ailes is correct. Depends on what they find, how many more wells they have to do. I really don't know the answer to that question. My understanding of this, though, DEP is requiring it. We have to do it. I think it's appropriate in nature to utilize retained earnings from the Airport Enterprise Fund. As Mr. Ailes indicated, there's $457,000 some change there. We have been doing it in a couple of years. I don't recall a grant, by the way, myself, but I think it's appropriate. It's just something we're going to have to dig into. I will also add, even though it's not really germane to this, it's my intention as your analyst to do a lot more work with the airport next fall. We've talked a little bit about that. So certainly when the time comes, I can certainly begin to inquire a little bit more, and hopefully I'll have a bit. I'm hoping that next fall we get our arms wrapped around a little bit more what's going on with the airport and how they're managed, and a whole bunch of recommendations I've always articulated. So we can certainly add that to the equation.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Perry. Councillor Houseman.
Yeah, this is actually not so much a question as a comment. As a real estate lawyer who has done some work with properties that have had contamination and needed to be cleaned up, My question really relates as much to, the question I asked earlier really relates as much to whether we're missing the forest for the trees. It's appropriate, obviously, for us to be focusing on the finances of this, but it's very interesting to me that the project for monitoring and assessing what's going on up there has been going on for a number of years, and the scope is now being expanded. And we live in a city where Varian, not that I want to equate the two, but that things were overlooked, things were not fully acknowledged. And so, you know, the context we're seeing this is in funding this additional research and monitoring, but as a council, I think it's appropriate for us to really learn more about why the scope of this is being expanded, you know, what's really going on. And I would also say that with full respect to, you know, our engineering staff here, they are not LSPs. And it would be helpful for us to have someone who could provide us with some independent information about what's going on here, short of our own engineering staff, which are not, as I said, which are not LSPs. So I guess I'd just say that's sort of a cautionary word for us to, as a council, be mindful of what's behind the request for more money to expand the scope of the work here. So it may prove to be nothing other than, you know, belts and suspenders, but it still, I think, raises a flag that we should be mindful of.
Thank you, Counselor.
Madam, I apologize. I should add one more comment to everything I said, which I didn't. My apologies. Even though I put it in my memorandum, when I publicly stated as your budget analyst, I do recommend adoption of this proposal. I just thought I should add that.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Speaking of belts and suspenders, thank you. Councilor Osmond, I just wanted to say, to your point, it sounds like the information from the LSP that Mr. Ailes has said that he would help us to be able to see for ourselves and share with the public is going to be a great first step to some of what you're talking about.
Yes,
so
thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Ailes, for helping us to get that. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak in this public hearing? Seeing none, I will close this public hearing and refer it back to the Subcommittee on Finance and Property for us to be able to take further action this evening. We have 3 minutes before our next hearing, so Ms. Kemp will go back to motions and orders. And we'll see how we can read Order 164 in 3 minutes.
Okay.
I'm supportive of you.
Order 223, Order 164, proposed amendments to Article 6, Section 192 Lodging House are summarized generally as follows. Amends the date that renewal applications will be mailed by the city clerk from September 15th to no later than August 1st or upon request for new applicants. Amends the date completed renewal applications must be entered to the city clerk from October 15th to no later than September 1st or within 30 days of receipt by a new applicant. Amends the date completed renewal applications will be sent to the relevant city inspectors from September 15th to no later than September 1st upon the receipt of a completed new applicant. Amends the date completed inspection reports are sent to the city clerk from November 15th to no later than October 31st or within 60 days of the case for new applicant. Amends the date renewal applications are presented to the city council from December 7th to no later than November 30th or within 30 days of the receipt of a new application. Authorizes the city clerk to issue a license forthwith upon the city council's vote to grant such license and no later than December 31st. Authorizes the city council to attach reasonable conditions to a license to operate a lodging house. Authorizes the city council to issue a probationary license to allow for applicants to remedy inspection violations and complete reinspection and to extend such license, issue license, or allow license to expire. Authorize the city council to, upon notification of violation of any law, code, regulation, ordinance, or license condition, or any other condition, incident, or circumstance that raises a question regarding the fitness of the license to operate a lodging house, to conduct an investigation and a hearing to determine whether the license should be suspended, revoked, and/or deemed licensed to be probationary status. Creates a fine of not less than $100 nor more than 500, or imprisonment for not more than 3 months, or both, in accordance to Mass General Law, Chapter 104, Section 24, for operating a lodging house without a license issued by the City Council. The full text of Order 164 can be read at the City Clerk's office during business hours at the Beverly City Hall. And this was in the newspaper on June 9th, and this is the first vote.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. I knew you could do it. Got us there. Councilor Rotundo, you worked on this and filed this proposed ordinance change. Is there anything you'd like to say about it this evening?
There was a lot of thought, a lot of process. Many departments were involved with it. It was really in response to last year's, seeing that every license that came in front of us, there was different issues with it. Great help from Assistant Solicitor Dole helping us with that, clerk's office, as well as the inspectional offices on this. So hopefully support, and this will help the lodging house owners as well as the residents there and municipal offices here.
Thank you very much, Councilor, and thanks for your work on this as well. Councilors, as you heard Ms. Kent read, this is for a first vote, not for final passage until its next reading, but is there a motion to approve Order 164?
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0 for this first vote on that proposed ordinance change. That brings us to 8:25. So we'll open our posted public hearing on Order 152. Ms. Kent.
Order number 152, the City of Beverly. Ordered that the City Council of the City of Beverly hold a public hearing on Tuesday, June 20th at 8:25 p.m. at 191 Cabot Street, 3rd floor, Council Chambers, live stream on BevCam, relative to a request for a budget transfer of $15,000 into the Fire Department budget to fund FY 2023 costs associated with the City of Beverly and the Firefighters Union, as well as some anticipated cost overage within the department's operating budget for FY 2023. And this was in the newspaper for Monday, June 12th.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. Mr. Ailes.
Good evening again. I'm here this evening with a couple representatives, both Chief O'Connor, as you mentioned before, and also Assistant City Solicitor Jesse Dole, to answer any specific questions you might have about this. But what the transfer request represents is the remaining payroll costs associated with implementing this MOA that we provided to the council to read. The MOA itself is the equivalent of roughly, I believe it's pretty accurate, of 1% wage adjustment to firefighters in response to the cooperation associated with the combined civilian dispatch work we're doing at the police station currently.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ailes. Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President. This may be a question best for Assistant Solicitor Dole. I know when we had a conversation as a council earlier, both on this agreement and then at the time, the ongoing discussion with the two police unions, it's my understanding that the reason that this side letter is necessary is because of a clause in the fire department collective bargaining agreement that necessitates, if a police union is to settle after the fire contract is settled, that then certain provisions which may have been included in the police contract that was settled at a later date also would apply now to the fire contract. Is that correct, that general understanding?
Not entirely. So the CBAs have what are referred to as reopener clauses, and what you're asking about is within the police and fire CBAs, the two police CBAs and the fire CBAs. If there's an increase in the detail rate given to one of those three units, and the other two units would have a right to request to reopen the negotiations of the CBA. So if you remember, I believe it was in October, back in October of 2021, we did execute the MOA for the FY 22-24 CBA with the fire bargaining unit. And then we, in March of this year, we were before you for funding of the two police MOAs. And the police MOAs did include an increase in the detail rate. So this side letter would give the fire bargaining unit the same detail rate that the two police unions, increase in the detail rate that the two police unions did receive. The one-time adjustment to base wages in recognition of their cooperation in the transition to a joint civilian dispatch operation, that was something that was negotiated with the two police unions, and then just in the interest of equity, and in recognition of the ongoing and continued cooperation of the firefighters unit in that transition to a joint civilian dispatch operation, we made the decision to offer that same one-time increase in base wages.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Sweeney. Counselor St. Hilaire.
Yeah, I guess for Mr. Ailes, just curious about the use of the reserve for unforeseen for this item versus reserve for union negotiations. Is there no money left in that account?
So as you'll see, we've got a number of transfer requests this evening that we're going to cover. We also have a few slated for the next Monday's meeting, and everything combined will exhaust all the reserves. It was just which public hearing is coming first.
Okay, as far as the line for reserve for union negotiation?
We could have just as easily taken it from that, and
I got you. Okay.
the next public hearing we'll be talking about will exhaust the union negotiation reserve.
What's left in the reserve for unforeseen?
Do you have those?
Counselor, currently, there's $33,214, so we'll be taking $15,000 of that for, if you approve this tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor St. Hilaire. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Perry, you look ready to say something. Up on your feet and ready to go?
I'm assuming no one from the public wants to speak, but simply put, there's sufficient funds. I answered the council's question. I do recommend adoption of the proposal. From my perspective, from a management point of view, it's been a long time trying to get this dispatch up and running, and this is one of the final steps to get there. So I would recommend adoption of the mayor's proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. And are there any members of the public who wish to speak in this public hearing? Seeing none, I'll close this public hearing and refer it back to the Committee on Finance and Properties. We can take action on that this evening. And we have time to go back to motions and orders before our next posted hearing. And take up Order 169, which is also for first reading and first vote tonight.
Order number 169, be it obtained by the City Council of the City of Beverly as follows. In the year 2023, an ordinance amending an ordinance relative to Chapter 270, Vehicles and Traffic, Section 270-49, off-street parking, handicap parking, amending Section 270-49 as follows. Add a handicap sign and space across from 25 Broadway on the southerly side of Broadway, easterly of the driveway to number 26. And this is the first vote. And it was in the newspaper June 9th.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. Councilors, is there a motion to approve Order 169 for its first vote?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0. All right. Is there a motion to take a brief 3-minute recess, actually?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We'll take a 3-minute recess and be back for our next public hearing.
I need a refill on that.
Thank you, everyone. I'll call the full council back to order, and we will pick up at 8:35 with our public hearing on Order 151. Ms. Kent.
Order number 151, City of Beverly, ordered that the City Council of the City of Beverly hold a public hearing on Tuesday, June 20th at 8:35 p.m. at 191 Cabot Street, 3rd floor, Council Chambers, live stream on BevCam, relative to a request for a transfer for up to $230,000 in the FY 2023 budget to fund retroactive costs back to July 1st, 2022. And this was in the newspaper on Monday, June 12th.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kent. Mr. Ailes, welcome back to the podium.
Getting comfortable up here, I think. Thank you very much. This request is to transfer funds from some of the remaining reserves that exist within the fiscal year 2023 budget to distribute them down to various departments throughout other budgets, primarily finance. There's finance, the clerk's department, a bunch of city hall departments that are affected by this. And it effectively is to fund costs associated with the implementation of the study that you see that was shared with you earlier last week about the classification and compensation study for City Hall employees. And so I don't expect that you may not have had a chance to read the 80-page report. It was very thoroughly done, but I do know Mr. Perry summarized it well in his memo to you. So we're happy to answer any specific questions you have about it, but this is a request to fund it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ailes. Councillor St. Hilaire.
Mr. Ailes, could you remind us what spurred this study on?
Sure.
What led to this?
Yeah, it's been a long-held belief by both BMEA employees as well as those that work with them that may not be part of that union, that there existed some disparities between some positions' compensation and comparable positions in other communities or comparable positions within the city government. And so it was felt the best way to address that sense was to get an independent review. And so we contracted with this company called GovHR that does these studies nationwide. They're out of Chicago. To come in and perform a thorough review of all of the positions within the BMEA unit, identify comparable communities, evaluate the comparable communities positions, and begin to make recommendations where needed about possible reclassifications and possible restructuring of compensation structures to better meet what we consider an ongoing demand for talent, not just within our community, but we're constantly fighting other communities for talent. The other component to it that we felt was important was retaining employees, recruiting and retaining strategies. And so we felt that ultimately the result that you all have in front of you met all of those goals in a very independent and comprehensive way.
Councillor St. Hilaire.
I was going to ask about the retention piece. Do you have any numbers around the city's turnover data or retention data? How we compare to other communities? Are we losing people? Is that myth a fact?
Yeah, I think it depends on the types of positions. I think you're going to have turnover in any organization of our size, but specific to this unit, which is about 65 to 70 employees, I believe, I can tell you with certainty, just looking down the hall at the planning department, which houses 5 or 6 of these employees, that whole office has turned over not once but twice in the past, I think 3 to 4 years. So there's been considerable turnover in some of those positions which are a little bit more technical in nature, where they have sometimes they have degrees or levels of experience in the planning, which is a bit different than some of the other positions that we have within the unit, where we may not have seen as much turnover. But we do have some regular turnover. The assessors department's another good example. All three of the staff that sit within the window of the assessors department are all within 2 years, new within 2 years. So we do have kind of a regular turnover. That's to be expected to some degree. But what we were finding is when we did have vacancies, the recruitment process was hindered as well by the level of compensation we could offer based on the constraints within the collective bargaining agreements.
And just one last unrelated, I guess, is the funds where the transfers are coming from. Could you remind us? It's the reserve for incentive plan, reserve for separation of service, right? And those really can't be used for anything else besides this sort of thing, right?
Right. I mean, we're at the end of the year now where we've got 2 more payroll runs, so we pretty much know where all the dust is settling on all the spending. Effectively, what I did is I looked at the reserve accounts and what was left in them that has been unused to date, and between this and the other orders that we just spoke of and that we'll speak of on the 26th, we're scooping all the remaining money and distributing and addressing a number of needs in other areas, this being one of them. So there are a number of sources that we cobble together to create these funds to make them available for this purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rotundo.
Thank you. Mr. Ailes, did you guys, I mean, obviously, the studies come out, and you sat with the union, I'm assuming, correct?
Correct.
And was there any room for negotiating between what they felt may not have been exactly reasonable from what the study came out to? I know there were a few people who may have had some issues with this, so I was just curious if that had been resolved.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pretend to speak for everybody in the union. I'm sure they have all taken this information. Some might view it more favorably than others. There's always, I think what the report does well when you read the report is that it is very thorough, and there's logical rationales behind the grading of positions, the scoring and ranking of positions, and the recommendations that came from this report. And we've made the consulting team available to the BMEA members for those types of questions that they may have had. And yeah, there was a handful of questions that came up. But I think when the consultant was able to peel back the onion and show them the layers that went into kind of how these positions were evaluated, there was, this wasn't just a consultant working in a bubble. There was questionnaires that went out to all the employees. Questionnaires went out to all the supervisors. Questionnaires went out to other communities. And all that data was compiled and analyzed by this consulting team to arrive at a scoring mechanism that weighted certain attributes of positions and certain requirements and certain responsibilities differently to arrive at kind of a cumulative ranking of positions. And the very few employees that raised a concern, it was really about where they fell in the ranking among their peers. And when you pulled back the onion, like I said, to show, well, here's how kind of the scoring worked, I think a lot of people saw the logic and kind of understood better how the end result wound up being what it was.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Houseman.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Ailes, could you elaborate a little bit for those at home who may not know who comprises the Beverly Municipal Employees Association? Sort of talk about the various staffing components that comprise that and sort of the level they are at in City Hall.
Sure. You've got a range of employees. Put the DPS employees aside, put the public safety employees aside, library workers. BMEA represents effectively everybody else. I might be missing another bargaining unit in there, but effectively everyone else that works in the city. So you have some employees that are sanitarians in the health department, along with there's some custodians that are in this group. There are engineers that are in this group. There are planners. There are clerical workers that work in a variety of capacities, whether some within the finance department doing clerical work, or out in other departments among our city government doing payroll, doing accounts payable. It really is the gamut. All of the engineering department resides in this collective bargaining unit. All of the accounting department does, the planning department, the clerk's department. Trying to think if I'm missing some. There's 64 or so people. You've got transportation. You've got bus drivers from the Council on Aging. So it really is a wide gamut of skill sets and experience that go into this unit. That's what makes it so difficult when you start looking at comparing, trying to make it apples to apples to compare them. And that's why this report really takes a lot of effort and a lot of narrative to try to explain how they went through that process in a logical way.
Thank you. One other question. I understand that the administration, that the report sort of laid out the possibility of sort of a 50% or a 70% increase, not in salary, but I forget percentiles, yeah. Could you elaborate on the administration's choice of one over the other? I mean, I certainly know that, a lot of what we deal with at City Council involves the planning department, and to see basically the planning department staff turnover twice in almost 2 years. It's really, really hamstrung what that department, can accomplish. When you're starting over, you're losing your institutional memory over and over again. So I certainly think, and I compliment the administration on engaging a report like this and doing the work. But having said that, getting back to the question of the choice in the percentiles.
Yeah, I think, that's a great example that you raised, Councilor Hausman, because that is certainly a lens that we looked through when doing this, one of the many we looked through. And to your point, those positions, as they were structured, most of them, I believe, fell within the 50th percentile. So we were having trouble recruiting, we were having trouble retaining at those salary levels, yet they were within the 50th percentile. So we really felt it was important to take the range of potential pay and shift it to a 70th percentile, which for everybody that's already in an existing position, it doesn't necessarily affect where they get placed in the scale. But what it does affect is later on in their career, 10 years, 15, 16 years down the road, when they get towards the top end of the pay scale, that there is more opportunity for them to remain competitive in the marketplace and not top out, which tends to be kind of an impetus for people looking elsewhere and trying to, get a better salary in some other community.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rand and then Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you so much. I guess what I'm sort of having trouble kind of like packaging my questions, but I guess I'm interested in how that like 70% level is distributed specifically amongst the lowest wage earners. Like you just said, there might be the incentive to continue and stay on until you reach the top level of earnings, but I'm kind of interested in how that affects your drivers, or I don't know, you mentioned the library, I don't know if the not the librarians, but the clerks at the library, if they're part of this unit or not.
Yep. Some of the lower compensated employees within the unit actually are some of the ones that have some of the largest adjustments based on the new percentiles. And part of that is because when the consultant looked to other communities to look at what comparable positions were getting paid, whether it was, I think you mentioned the bus drivers at the COA or something, we found that those were positions that in many cases were paid either below or in some cases well below the 50th percentile of pay in the Commonwealth and comparable communities. And so that adjustment to get them right-sized is a much bigger jump for them than maybe some of the other positions are. Every band within the salary structure represents a 30% swing. So it's a 70th percentile, but it's 30% in terms of growth over time, and that's a 20-year period that they could potentially grow over. So you can see how we tried to build in retention with that added incentive in these structures.
Follow up, please. And so are you feeling like the retention for the lowest wage earners is sort of as incentivized as it is for the top wage earners, given these changes?
I feel for comparable positions it is. So, for example, just to continue to use the same example for a bus driver, I feel based on the work the consultant did that to go to a comparable community for the same job, we would likely be very competitive with those other communities. And so there's not as much of an incentive I mean, there's always incentive to grow individually, maybe into a different position or into a larger community. That's not what we're comparing ourselves to. But when you look at the report and how they selected the comparable communities, you'll understand that we're very comparable to probably about a dozen or so communities that they use to try to gather this data. And we would be very, very competitive up against those communities for similar workers and, you know, to help retain our employees as well.
Okay, just, if I may, one follow-up comment?
Yes, but before we do that, I'm just gonna pause this hearing so that we can open the 8:50 hearing on Order 154, please, Ms. Kent, and then we'll come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Order 154, City of Beverly, order that the Council of the City of Beverly hold a public hearing on Monday, June 20th at 8:50 PM at 191 Cabot Street, 3rd floor, Council Chambers, live stream on BevCam, relative to a request for a transfer of $600,000 from the city's certified free cash balance to be placed into the city's road and sidewalk capital to support paving work for fiscal year 2024. And this is the newspaper, June 12th.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kent. I would entertain a motion to recess the public hearing on Order 154 to 9 o'clock.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So we'll move to 9 o'clock and pick that back up, and we'll return to the public hearing on Order 151 with your follow-up, Councilor Rand.
Thank you so much. So I guess my last thought on this is, while I love the idea of sort of equitably increasing the pay for especially the lowest wage earners, but everyone who's working hard for the city, I do sometimes feel very concerned with the practice of comparing, just kind of comparing across communities. I think that benefits us on a lot of levels. And like you said, the idea that we can retain a bus driver because we pay the same amount as surrounding communities is logical, but also all the surrounding communities are probably underpaying that position. So there's some part of that philosophy that is, I don't know, I just think that in order to really value our lowest wage earners, there needs to be a lessening of that gap, especially considering the cost of living in our community now. So I think, you know, paying someone minimum wage is at least the bare minimum, but how much does it cost to live in Beverly, and how are we kind of making those lowest wage positions accessible to, you know, people who live in our community and want to stay in our community? Those are the kinds of things I think about, though this all is in the right direction. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rand. Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam President. And to echo Councilor Houseman's comments, I certainly want to commend you, Mr. Ailes, and the mayor and the whole administration on this effort for really the core of our municipal workforce here, target the 70th percentile and really make an effort to provide more competitive wages to a wide swath of the employees that really drive day-to-day municipal operations. One quick comment I'll make, in Boxford, we actually worked with the same company, GovHR, to do a similar study. So I know that other communities are constantly undertaking similar evaluations. So I appreciated the methodology that GovHR put together, in determining which peer communities to utilize, and want to just encourage the administration. I'm sure you're planning to do so already, but to continually look at the data and look at what communities in our area are paying every so often, so that we don't fall behind to the point where we had to make corrections as proposed in this report. Just quickly, I know I read this in the narrative of the budget document that we've been reviewing these past few weeks, but to confirm, for the coming fiscal year, FY24, all of the required salary line items to meet the 70th percentile are included in that budget as proposed to us, correct? And we won't need to make any similar adjustments this coming fiscal year to implement this report?
I'm glad you raised that, Counselor. I want to be very clear with how we intend to handle it so that the vote this evening reflects this. You're voting for $230,000, which will cover FY23 costs. Within the FY24 budget, because we didn't know how this vote would go, we put everyone's position at their scheduled pay rate, excluding this report, not including this report. And we put a reserve aside for what the redistributed effect will be in FY24 should you approve it this evening. And what we will do is we will redistribute that reserve down to the respective positions so that they're funded fully in FY24 with a approval vote this evening. We'll do that.
And so, come FY24, we'll need to take a similar vote, but the money is in the budget to be moved into the...
So it is specified within the budget that that reserve is for redistribution to BMEA employees and will be done upon an approval this evening. So it's spelled out very specifically in the budget what it will be used for. So in my opinion, no, I don't believe you need to take a second vote.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeney. Councillor Bowen.
That was actually my same question.
Oh, all right, thank you, Councillor Bowen. Any other comments or questions from members of the council? Any members of the public who hope to speak in this public hearing? Mr. Perry, any thoughts or comments from you?
Thank you, Madam President. A couple additional comments to what Mr. Ailes said. First off, the three categories that they're asking transfers in, the reserve for incentive of $89,000 will pretty much deplete that fund. The $130,000 for the reserve for separation, there's $174,000 in there currently, so we will have a little bit there. And $11,000 is being taken out of short-term principal. We have $410,000. So there's sufficient funds, as Mr. Ailes indicated. Second thing, which I would bring to your attention, which really not a lot of people know this, but I do. To refresh your memory, some of you folks have been around a little bit. We spent several years looking at the salaries of elected officials, as you may recall. And we had some success there with Councilor Rotundo at the end there, pushing that a little bit. But several years ago, we weren't successful at it. And as you may recall, we hired the Collins Center to come in here to take a look and help us out with a report. We didn't agree to what they said at the time. But there's a woman by the name of Mary Accardi, completely separate from this consultant group here. And I remember having a 10 or 15-minute conversation with her at that time, 3 or 4 years ago. And she brought to my attention at that time that we were being a bit in equity with some of these positions and the salaries. It's a little bit with what Councilor Rand has been talking about a little bit. So I knew this 3 or 4 years ago. I had conversations with the administration about this, and I think they've been trying to do the right thing. And bottom line to it is, I've really read this report carefully. It's my opinion that nothing's perfect in life, but this is far more equitable to the staff of the city of Beverly than currently exists. I'm kind of pleased with it. When I read it there about a week or so ago, I think it's a pretty good job. And as such, it really tried to take personalities out of it and look at the position and rate and grade the position, and I think they did a pretty good job. The only other final comment I'd make is Mr. Ailes is still working on it, unless he's completed it. I kind of beat him up a little bit last week. It says up to $230,000. We may not spend all of that. He's still calculating that before we close out these last few payrolls, but it will come close to that. So if you see carefully, it says up to $230,000. So hopefully, there is, in my view, sufficient funds. I did look at the spreadsheet of all the considerations, and the 230 will do the trick. Finally, Madam President, members of the council, it's my recommendation, given the totality of all this stuff, it's my recommendation as your budget analyst that you adopt the proposal of the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Councilor St. Hilaire, I apologize, I missed your hand.
No, that's
before.
okay. I just wanted to point out, this is retroactive, right? A year retroactive pay,
Yes.
essentially what we're doing.
Yes.
And
Back
I
to
guess,
July 1.
How did that decision come to be, and why not just start, why not include this in this year's budget and start this year? What, and why a year?
It's very intentional, and I'll tell you why. We've been committed to this process for more than a year, and we didn't want to rush the process. We knew it was needed to be thorough and it needed to be done right. And rather than rush into a version of it back 6 months ago or 7 or 8 months ago, just to kind of get it inked, we told union members at the time that if you just afford us the amount of time that's necessary to do this thing right, we will commit to a July 1st, 2022 implementation date so that they wouldn't be out any money for the delay in the process. And that was the commitment we as the administration made to the union membership. And so that's what we're trying to honor here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions or comments from councilors? All right, I'll close this public hearing and refer that back to the Committee on Finance and Property to take further action this evening. And we will pick up our public hearing that we had opened and recessed on Order 154. Ms. Kent already read the order, did, so I will invite Mr. Ailes back to the podium.
Getting my exercise today, I know. I think I got 10,000 steps in so far. Yeah, thank you very much again. So this public hearing is for the transfer of $600,000 into the Road and Sidewalk Fund. You're all familiar with the topic. We've been discussing it over the last few weeks in relation to the FY24 budget. As you know, the FY23 contribution total to the roads and sidewalk budget was $2.7 million. This year for FY24, we're proposing $2.1 million in the FY24 budget, along with this $600,000 to equal the 2.7 that was transferred in FY23 to effectively level fund the road and sidewalk budget for FY24.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Questions from members of the council for Mr. Ailes? Councilor St. Hilaire.
So, I guess at the outset of the budget discussions, I mentioned that, I really don't like the fact that we're cutting road and sidewalk spending in our FY24 budget. Mr. Ailes, we've talked about the budget reflecting, being a reflection of our values. I can tell you, we hear all the time when we've talked a lot about this, cutting this line out, I think we should be spending more money. And I'm going to approve this tonight, but I guess part of my concern is, the way we budget around here is we take a look at what we spent last year, right? And that's how we build next year's budget. And part of my concern is we're not spending enough on this item. And how are we going to budget this moving forward? And I'd like to see some sort of commitment on that. I mean, I really don't like the idea that we're not building this in as a priority in our budget. We're taking what we have left and spending it on roads and sidewalks. That's what it feels like. And I think we need to do more than that.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. I don't entirely agree with the characterization of a cut because I feel that it is a level funding in total. I understand that it lies in one area as opposed to another, but the dollars that are going into the road and sidewalk budget will be the same as they were in FY23 with this approval.
To follow up on that, I mean, we moved this hearing to tonight so that would have happened before the final budget vote. It wasn't a guarantee that would happen. And so, with all due respect, I appreciate that, but you're relying on us passing this tonight.
Yes, similarly, I would rely on you to pass a budget item for roads and sidewalks. I mean, it's money we're putting into roads and sidewalks, so I would expect support. But I mean, it's up to your discretion whether or not you want to approve it or not.
I guess, and I do want to approve it. I guess to me, it should be in the budget. I guess that's my point.
Let me just kind of give a different perspective on this. If you were to go across the harbor over to Marblehead, for example, I happen to know because I've reviewed their budget a couple of years ago. They actually take free cash every year, and they use it and insert it into the coming year's fiscal year budget, as a revenue source. We don't do that here. But a similar approach would yield effectively what you're looking to see. My point is that it is somewhat half a dozen of one, six of another, the way we're funding it. Because if we increased the FY24 budget by, say, an extra $600,000 and funded roads and sidewalks at 2.7 through the budget document, that just means there's going to be $600,000 less in free cash at the end of the year. So it's just a matter of
We don't
which
budget other
pocket
things
you're
that
bringing.
way.
We do. There are other things that we're proposing on the 26th that are similarly funded related to free cash. We view this as one-time in nature in the sense that you can retract from it, just as roads and sidewalk funding in the budget is a one-time expenditure which you can fluctuate from year to year. I will also point out that FY23 was a high watermark, and I don't disagree that we need to put as much money as we can into roads and sidewalks. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it is really six of one, half dozen of another in terms of where the funding's coming from. The important point, I feel, is that we're putting 2.7 collectively as a commitment to our roads and sidewalks next year. And so I'll just leave it there.
I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Sweeney, and then we'll go to Counselor Bowen, Counselor Rotundo.
Thank you, Madam President, and this ultimately will end in a question to Mr. Perry, but I do want to make a few points about that back and forth dialogue, and certainly want to echo the sentiments that Councilor St. Hilaire voiced about the need, and it seems as though, Mr. Ailes, you referenced it, and I know the administration's committing to slowly working to address the large need in repairing our roads and sidewalks across the city over the span of a number of years. We're not going to catch up in any given fiscal year. And so while I want to make note of and make clear that I appreciate the effort of the administration to maintain level funding, even if it's through two different vehicles with the budget and then this free cash proposal for FY24, as opposed to putting the full $2.7 million in the budget, my concern is for future fiscal years. You know, as I mentioned, it's going to take a number of years to meet liability that Commissioner Collins has characterized as tens of millions of dollars, and really it wouldn't even be feasible to pave all the roads if we wanted to. That's how big the need is. And so in future fiscal years, the point that I really want to emphasize as we have this discussion is that I would hope that we can find a way to maintain what you mentioned is a high water mark of $2.7 million or more potentially in funding in the coming years to annually put towards our roads and sidewalk repairs. And so this is where, you know, I don't want to pin you into a position here, but do want to pose this in the form of a question to Mr. Perry. If we're to take this approach in future fiscal years, where, let's say fiscal year 25 rolls around, the funding in the budget is maintained at $2.1 million as opposed to a full 2.7 in the budget, which, as you mentioned, you know, does involve some accounting in terms of whether or not there's value in doing one method or the other. But then if we were to replicate this approach in FY25 and the administration were to come to us with another $600,000 in a free cash proposal, free cash transfer proposal before the council, my only concern is that Mr. Perry cited in recent memos and in conversations that he believes the council and the administration jointly needs to be more disciplined in terms of relying on free cash. So maybe, Mr. Perry, this will be the question that I pose to you here, and Mr. Ailes, feel free to comment. Would it be sustainable in the long term for us to, while we don't ultimately make any commitments until the proposal is before us and the public hearing takes place and the council ultimately votes, if we were to kind of informally look to pulling, whether it's $600,000 or a greater amount in free cash every year to subsidize the appropriation in the budget for roads and sidewalks, do you believe that's a sustainable approach for us to consider? You know, tonight that's what we'd be voting on, but then potentially in future fiscal years.
Thank you for the question, Councilor. With your permission, Madam President.
Please.
I want to answer that, but I want to touch upon a whole bunch of other things. You know, I'm up here now. I would have preferred to see 2.7 in the budget. Okay, I agree with that. However, we had a different challenge this year compared to other years, and we talked about this at great length in some of our hearings. We got hit pretty hard with healthcare costs this year, didn't we? We all know that. It's not a secret. We're talking well over $2 million between the school side and the municipal side, and it was a real large leap that was very difficult to really handle here. If we were to do the $2.7 million, as I would have liked to have seen, that would have meant cutting $600,000 from someplace. I won't say cut. We would have reduced what was suggested by the mayor someplace along the line. And with all due respect, and I'm glad we have one of the school committee members here tonight, in my view, there would have been about $400,000 or $500,000 from the school department in order to balance the budget. We still have to balance a budget. So the administration had a difficult choice here, and they didn't know what to do. They were trying to, as I told you in my opening commentary, it was pretty much a level services budget. We get a few extra teachers, and there's an extra cop and some harbor. There's a little bit there, but nothing like we saw last year. And as such, that was the problem. So they took the decision to reduce the roads and sidewalks by $600,000 with the strategy, as you all know, to take it from free cash. Do I believe it's sustainable going forward? Yeah, my gut instincts are. I'm not going to guarantee it. As you saw from my memo, and I am going to talk a little bit about this now with your permission, Madam President, I had a lengthy conversation with Mr. Ailes about this very issue. You're right. Last month, I got up here with 5 or 6 principles that I felt very strong that we have to be very focused and disciplined because we're taking on City Hall, we're doing the McPherson Center, and we're doing Cabot Street. That's like $35-odd million here. My wish and intention is to see us try to pay cash for both the McPherson Center, which will take a lot of ARPA funds at least, as well as the Cabot Street, and get that down to a point where we do not borrow for those 2 projects. I was very fascinated. I forget which one of you asked about the square footage of this building. I got out my phone here and I'm tapping away, and we're talking anywhere from a low of $17.5 to $28 million to do City Hall. And my instincts tell me we're going to end up borrowing almost all of that to do the project. So where are we at? The year-end revenues seem to be coming in strong. Mr. Ailes is very optimistic that the balance sheet will look good. I cautiously agree with him when we get the balance sheet in November or December. And I'm optimistic we'll have hopefully a similar number or somewhat similar number in nature when we see the free cash come in. If that comes in, like I hope it comes in, and I will speak for Mr. Ailes, he's more than happy. I wish the mayor was here more than anybody else, but it's my expectation next year when we do our first free cash transfers that obviously we do stabilization first per our policies, OPEB second, and then the third category is a significant investment towards the project at Cabot Street. And I'm hoping to see as much as, my dot in the wall is as much as $2 million to come out of free cash in the fall to offset some of that borrowing. We're still not there. It's $8 million for Cabot Street. We've already taken 2. I'd like to see another 2, bring us down to 4. Mr. Ailes correctly told me, when we eventually sell Cabot Street, maybe another couple of million there. So we're still $2 million away from, and it's going to take another 2 to 4 years, as I indicated earlier, to get that down to 0. I'm hoping the McPherson Center will come in such a capacity that most, if not all of it, is paid by ARPA, and then we borrow for this. Looking at the debt schedule, I believe it will work. And as such, the bottom line to all this is it's a judgment call. Municipal finance is as much art as it is science. I can't guarantee you anything, but my gut instincts of 40-plus years of doing this is we'll be okay with this. I think it'll be sustainable. I think it's the best approach. I don't think the schools could have handled a $400,000 to $500,000 cut in the budget, in my view anyways. They would have had to lay some people off, and I think, given the totality of the situation, I think this is the right approach, given everything we know here. I do want to finally remind you, I said this a while back, if you really want to do all the roads and sidewalks, we need $7 or $8 million a year to do this properly. We can't do it under the laws of Proposition 2.5. I've said that before, I'm saying it again, and I have a feeling I'll say it some more in the future to keep reminding everybody how much liability we have in terms of trying to fix these roads and sidewalks. It's very difficult. So they're doing the best they can. I can tell you from my own experience, we do a little bit better here than we do in other communities, but there's no way you're going to fix them all over my lifetime and probably all of your lifetimes as well. Bottom line, Madam President and members of the council, with a lot of thought in reflection on this, it is my recommendation you pass this tonight. I am fully aware of how important roads and sidewalks are to all 9 of you, from not only for the 9 of you, but your prior councilors. This is a big ticket item for all of you. But as long as the administration commits, and Mr. Ailes, I don't think is going to reject, they're going to come back to you in the fall with a strong commitment to deal with the Cabot Street project, certainly in the fall, I would recommend adoption of this proposal. Madam President, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you or your colleagues may have on my thoughts.
Thank you. We have a little bit of a line going, but Councillor Sweeney, this was your question.
Just a quick follow-up. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Perry, for your comments. Just to maybe add a few quick comments and then obviously turn over to my colleagues here. I know we have many questions, but my concern, again, I appreciate the effort of the administration to maintain the high watermark of funding that you all had put forward previously last fiscal year to commit to addressing this need at $2.7 million. So I don't want to mitigate that, but my concern is that if we get, 2, 3, 4, 5 fiscal years out, we don't see the same level of new growth that we have seen in recent years. This would be the first thing to fall by the wayside, in that if we take the approach of, instead of putting $2.7 million or more in the budget each year, relying on kind of a split between an appropriation of 2.1 or whatever the figure is and 600,000 or whatever the figure is in free cash, that would be the first thing to be cut essentially in practice if revenues were to come in at lower levels in future fiscal years than we've seen in recent years. So that's, I know I'm sure the administration shares those concerns, but I really do want to make clear my sentiments on this. Plan to vote for this proposal. I appreciate the efforts by the administration to put it forward, but I am concerned about not meeting our commitment in future fiscal years.
Council, if I could address that, I kind of asked Finance Director Sid, what I'm hoping to see, come back to the healthcare costs we talked about this year and the dramatic increase we saw, well over $2 million. I'm hoping that on a sustainability level, if we keep getting $2+ million a year on healthcare costs, both the municipal side and the school side, yeah, we're going to have a problem. My gut instincts tell me we're not going to see that. So we will see an increase, I'm sure, in healthcare, but not to that magnitude. This is the biggest one since I've been here, and if we get normal healthcare cost increase, it's going to make that sustainability easier, and I think it will solve some of the questions you're posing, which are good questions, but I'm looking at it in terms of healthcare costs leveling out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perry, and thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeney.
Can I just make a comment to Councilor Sweeney? Because I just want to acknowledge that I agree with you. This is not a sustainable approach that I would look to employ in the future. This, as Mr. Perry said, it's kind of a one-off year. It's that year where we've got to try to figure out how to make it all work. So I just want to acknowledge that I share.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ailes. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeney. So Councillor Bowen, Councillor Tendo, Councillor St. Hilaire, please.
Thank you. And so the concern / idea that I have, I think, builds really well on this conversation. I share the perspective that the more we can build into the budget for roads and sidewalks, and the more that we can get from that money, the better. And for me, my biggest concern about sort of how we approach this unusual year is about that second piece, how we as a council can ensure that the city is getting its money's worth for that paving budget. I think the best way to do that is to continue having these conversations. And given that there is some questions still about where the balance sheet is going to end this year, and that there are advantages to us as a city and our financial planning to have a strong balance sheet at the end of this fiscal year. And given that the way our roads and sidewalks budget works, we appropriate that money and park it in a project fund, and it's spent as needed, as capacity allows. We don't get regular updates on how that spending is going. We don't get the list of roads that are coming up. We've asked. In our most recent discussion as part of the budget hearings, we were told that public services and engineering are working towards a 3-year plan, may get there soon. I think our best tool for ensuring that we get there by November, December is to vote against this proposal right now, and we can make the commitment that we would support a $600,000 or more or less free cash request once this year's free cash is certified towards next year's overall paving budget. If we're thinking of this as a fiscal year 24 expense, can we handle it within fiscal year 24? So would love to hear reactions, but also think it's something that is not just about the dollar amount, but how and when that dollar amount is accounted for, how it's programmed, how much information we get up front about where that money is likely to go.
Council, I'd like to address that. I would advise you against that as your budget analyst. When June 30th kicks in, free cash goes away, okay? And you're right, we don't know for sure what it's going to be till November, December, whenever the balance sheet is done. Close out the books, we see, you reconcile everything. If we wait to put it off the next year like you're considering, and again, I'm suggesting you not do that, that's going to dip into what I'm trying desperately to recommend to all of you, including the mayor and the finance director, is to try to draw down the debt for these projects. You're going to inhibit that by kicking that can down the road next year, in my opinion, because we don't know for sure what's going to happen there. The $600,000 is there currently. It is, again, this is my recommendation. I'm not here to debate it with you, but I would advise you against that. If you're going to do it now, but I would not be recommending you do it in the fall. I would be very hard as your budget analyst to recommend in the fall, because in my view, we got to put as much money as humanly possible towards these projects. That's my recommendation to you.
If I may, just to respond specifically to that, we've just discussed how this money is essentially fungible from year to year, that either it is certified at the end of the year, we wait 6 months for that and then are able to spend it, or we spend it now and lock it up now, so it is not available later on. It's locked in a particular purpose. And I just find it hard to believe that we're going to spend all of the first $2.1 million and be tapping into the last $600,000 by December or January. I think that will be a great time to assess where we landed, whether we can in fact afford that in the fiscal year 24 budget, and whether we can use it in the fiscal year 24 budget effectively on a plan of road improvements that we've seen and contributed to. So I think I understand you want to be able to prioritize specific requests in free cash next year, and that sounds like a very sound strategy, and I just don't think that this would necessarily hinder that. If we don't commit to prioritizing it, it could, but if we commit to prioritizing it, I think it's the same dollars before and after the end of the fiscal year.
Well, like anything else, I can only give you my recommendation. You vote your conscience.
What's that, Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Rotundo, you were next, and then we'll go to Councillor St. Hilaire, please.
Thank you. Mr. Ailes, knowing what we know about what Mr. Perry's told us in regards to the money, I understand the health insurance, I understand the $600,000. But the reality of it is 2.7 level funded, there's actually a decrease in the road and sidewalk funding. In reality, because the cost of inflation's gone up. And so my fear is, I know we keep saying the benchmark is at this amount, but that means is that we're still not maintaining, we're not even at a maintenance level. We're going in a decline on our roads and sidewalks. And I also understand the fact that we just don't, this is an anomaly year that we have such a high increase of insurance for health and everything like that. But going forward, my concern is if we're using 2.7, knowing that 2.7 is still not sufficient to maintain our roads and sidewalks at the conditions that they are, just maintain. We're declining it. That's my fear going forward. We're at 2.1. I understand taking the $600,000 for this year. It's just a vehicle getting there. I agree. I wish it was 2.7 in the budget, not taking it from free cash, or better yet, 2.7 and then taking additional money and putting it at the 3-point-something million. That's neither here or there. I just want to publicly state right now is my concerns is going forward through the budgets that knowing that 2.7 is not adequate to maintain our roads right now. I know $7-8 million. I'm not looking for that, but I'm looking for a maintenance position right now. And in regards to not accepting the $600,000 this year, I know, speaking with the engineer, they need to plan on what they're doing for projects, so they need to know that we are gonna commit 2.7 million. If we commit 2.1, they're gonna only commit projects for 2.1 million. And I know they're bidding these out from what they've told me recently.
Yeah.
So like I said, my concerns is where we're at with the budget going forward. And, again, the mayor builds the budget, gives it to us, we look at it, we have just the authority just to cut budgets. We know this year was a very, as you said, you turned every pebble over just to, claw back money to make the health insurance. I get that. But going forward, I don't want this to be said from the administration that 2.7 is a high benchmark. It isn't. It's a level funded, which is a decline in the money, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious, and we can share this information too, in terms of whether or not it's a declining. See, it's not a guaranteed that buying power goes down year over year, because the price of asphalt is tied to petroleum and crude, and that does fluctuate. And so depending upon the timing of when the asphalt prices get set, you could actually have a year over year price decline in the asphalt. Granted, labor typically goes up, so it's not as simple as just acknowledging it's a decline. It may be close. It could be more. It could be less. We don't know for sure right now, but I can look into those numbers for you. But I do agree with you. 2.7. Would I love to stand here and be arguing over 5 million? And of course. I mean, you'll recall where we were 10 years ago, and I know you've all heard this. 10 years ago, we were putting like $250,000 into paving. And every year we try to put a little more and step it up and step it up and step it up. And, we've collectively been successful in doing that by, being thoughtful with how we use our resources here. And I don't see that changing anytime in the future. And we'll continue to do that. And that's a commitment the mayor continues to reiterate, that we will put as much into roads and sidewalks as we possibly can every year. So. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rotundo. Councilor St. Hilaire, that brings us to you.
So just a couple quick points, just 100% agree with Councilor Rotundo, and, I think even in your response there, we're gonna put as much as we can. I'd rather say next year we're gonna put 3 million, and the year after that, we're gonna put 3.5, and build it into our budget, make it a priority like we do other things. Second point, City Hall, we just heard a project for $25 million. Sounds like we're having trouble thinking about how we can afford that, and, we hear from our budget analyst about concern about our financial position over the next few years. Is that related to this project coming to a head here?
Mr. Perry.
Yes. In order, it's not a secret, we've talked about this a couple of times already. The goal is to pay for cash for Cabot Street in the McPherson project. It will probably end up borrowing, at least from my instincts, for the entire project here. I've looked at the debt figures, it'll work. But if we start paying more debt for Cabot and we start paying debt for McPherson, it gets more complicated. That's why I'm trying to be extremely aggressive with both the administration and the council to try to make sure that we use our free cash position to pay down some of the debt. We did a similar exercise and were successful in building a police station. It worked. And I'm trying to do, with every ability that I possess, to try to get everyone on the same page to do the same thing, and I'm hoping we can. So I believe it'll work, and time will tell.
The question is, though, are we choosing to fund those projects over committing to a road and sidewalk plan that will be forward-looking, that will actually meet the infrastructure needs? And I'm not asking you to answer that, but I think we need to be factoring that into how we're thinking about this, because maybe it's re-looking at the timing of these projects. Maybe it's re-looking at the scope. Because I know from my seat, I'd much rather see a 3 to 5 year road and sidewalk paving plan that's funded at a level that's going to make some progress, and maybe putting off some of these projects, either in phasing or in timing or in scope, or rethinking that. But I think there needs to be a thought that this is a priority. And then the last thing, Mr. Perry, I appreciate your comment about having to cut $400,000 to $500,000 from the schools. If we're, $600,000, I don't necessarily agree with that. There's lots of places we can cut in the budget. We have wiggle room in other places, and I don't think any one of us would say we want to go to the schools and cut the schools. So I appreciate the comment, but you know, it's a $157 million budget. We're talking about $600,000.
And Thursday night, you'll have that opportunity.
That's right.
Looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Houseman and then Counselor Rand.
Yes. I'm going to try to paraphrase my esteemed Counselor Rand colleague here. It's kind of hard to sort of put together the questions that I want to try to get at here, but I'm going to make a stab at it. I'm going to ask Mr. Perry, but I'm going to ask Mr. Ailes to also answer the same question right off the top, which is, generally what I have always heard on the council is that when we have a difficult year, the first place we go in the budget to try to manage a difficult squeeze is roads and sidewalks. Am I incorrect in that memory? Isn't that typically what we have always been advised?
I don't know if the word's advised, but I can almost assure you, every community does that. You know, there's flexibility with the roads and sidewalks if they let it go for a year or two if things are tough, and that's an area, from my experience, most communities will reduce or cut or whatever you want to call it, given when you get challenged a little bit. So yeah, it's a strategy that's pretty universal in municipal finance.
And I guess I'd ask Mr. Ailes if you would concur or not.
It is certainly one of the areas of the budget that is flexible. So, as a result, it tends to ebb and flow. However, to say that it's one of the first areas, I would say it's actually one of the last, particularly in this year. I need to give you some perspective because we're talking about, you know, strategies around the FY24 budget. When we first received budget requests for FY24, we were $10 million out of balance. That's the largest I've ever seen. That's an enormous amount. Typically, we're out of balance about 2 to 3 million, and then we go through our exercises. We had to shave out $10 million from the requests that we received. Now, sure, some of the stuff we could say, well, this is a little bit of a, you know, a pipe dream, a, you know, pie in the sky kind of thing, and we were able to kind of get that down. But departments worked really, really hard, and I know the school committee woman is here, and I know they worked just as hard to get the budget as responsible as they could be and still get this budget balanced. And at the end of the day, sitting in a room, we had to say, we can't get it to balance. We need another $500,000. And that was turning over every pebble, as Councilor Rotunda said, because I know he's heard the story. We weren't turning over boulders. We were turning over little tiny pebbles. And at the end of the day, we said, we know we've got capacity in the free cash. We've got $1 million capacity before the end of the fiscal year. Revenues are coming in strong. Let's use that as the one-time relief valve and get through this budget cycle and continue the commitment to roads and sidewalks that we all want. I know we want more, but at least we're not working backwards. So I just needed to give you that perspective.
Yeah, thank you. If you would stay there. So is the administration, it's unfortunate Mayor Cahill's not here, but I'll ask you as his proxy, is it the administration's policy to sort of, as outlined in Mr. Perry's 5 or 6 different guideline points for us over the next few years, to put a significant amount of free cash next year towards paying down the Cabot Street, you know, after you pay stabilization and OPEB? Is that still the administration's commitment?
We have to do that in order to balance it all.
And the council, all of us, have already funded a project to purchase Cabot Street. We've already funded design work for City Hall redo. We've already put money towards the Miv Kearson Youth Center. I guess what I'm getting at is, if I'm getting at anything, is that we have already committed ourselves as a council to a certain path. And we were told, and when we made our votes, we were supposed to understand that what that meant were that we had certain disciplined decisions we were going to have to make going down the road. And yes, we would all want more in roads and sidewalks. I hear it all the time from my constituents, as we all do. But we have sort of made a commitment towards a particular set of goals here and already invested a great deal of money to doing that, and doing that at a certain time frame. And so while as I think everyone in this room would like to be talking about more money for roads and sidewalks, I think we should, personally, I'm going to vote in favor of it. Mr. Perry has recommended it, and I think it's consistent with what the council has already committed to, unless we're going to start dramatically changing a lot of courses that we've already invested a great deal of money towards and shown a financial commitment towards. So I do want to address one thing that Councilor Bowen said, which is, because I know one of the things you said when you started out was, I'm going to use my own word, but sort of wanted a little bit more respect from the administration in terms of getting reports, being in the loop about what's going on with the progress of some of our projects. So we've heard from DPS, Commissioner Collins and Eric Barber, that they are reorganizing the Department of Public Services. They're asking for sort of 6 months, basically January of next year, from us to implement the kinds of management changes they want to do, which they think will enable them to start completing projects in a way that they have not before. I share your frustration. Mr. Perry's memo talks about the culvert project, right? Had to be done immediately. We put money into it, it still isn't done yet, after a lot of time has gone by. So personally, I'm sort of committed to giving DPS until January for all of us who are here at that point, and see if they have accomplished what they are, and then start holding them to it. And we can. It's certainly been my position in the past that, we can always, as a council, hold the administration's feet to the fire when it comes to any kind of request they bring before us for our action, to say we're not happy with, not being in the loop more, or with any particular item. And I think, for me at least, that's where I want to go, which is I want to give DPS that time. I recognize we had a one-off year. Roads and sidewalks, unfortunately, seems to be a standard municipal finance device for how we get through things. But if we want or wanted to tell the administration, listen, we want to see $3.5 million every year for roads and sidewalks, we should have been having that, and that's a rock solid goal. Before you talk about anything else, we should have been having that conversation when we committed, the money to buy Cabot Street and all these other things that we've already, in my opinion, committed ourselves to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hostman. Councilor Rand.
Thank you. Through you, Council President, to Mr. Ailes. Logistically speaking, if this transfer goes through, do we then see the FY23 roads and sidewalks line item increase by $600,000?
That line within the budget would go up by 600 with a free cash transfer in. Yes, correct.
The FY23 line.
Nope. The accounting needs to take place in FY23 before June 30th. It would affect the FY23 budget when you print out a budget report later on. Yep.
Thank you. Just a comment, and that's how I've been thinking of this. I understand FY24, we're going to see a decrease, right, in what we've seen over the past, but, and this is just semantics, I guess, but I'm looking at this as actually an increase in FY23. So knowing that FY24 is a year where the city has had to find money that didn't exist, as you've already spoken about. So I think, and my only other question is, generally speaking, about all of these transfers, what will the short-term principal balance be if all of the transfers proposed between today and the 26th be, if they all go through?
I don't have the exact figure, but I know ballpark.
Okay.
It's about $250,000.
Okay.
And that $250,000 will be transferred to the dollar store lot purchase before June 30th. Because that line allows for transfers to previously authorized loan authorizations. So I will use it to pay down that debt authorization, as Mr. Perry mentioned earlier. And there's also funding in the FY24 budget for that same purpose of about roughly the same. I think it might be under 200. And to your point about the spending, you're right in terms of like if you were to take snapshots year over year. I think what might be helpful for everybody, and I'm just realizing this, maybe I should provide this, is we should look at the capital fund and show the expenditure every year out of that fund, because that will show a more accurate portrayal of kind of what we spend every year. So we can work on that and get you something on that if it's helpful.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you, Councilor Rand. Are there members of the public who wish to speak in this public hearing? There is one. Please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record, if you would. And then you have up to 3 minutes to give us your commentary.
Cool. My name is Lorinda Visnick. I live at 39 Middlebury Lane. I'm speaking for myself, although a decent amount of what I'm going to say is probably inspired or driven by what I know about my role on the school committee. So, I heard Bryant say 6 of one, half dozen of another. I heard Mr. Perry say if we add $600,000 to the budget, we'd have to cut from somewhere else. And I think Mr. Hausman and I and Mr. Ailes and I have been around this mulberry bush a whole bunch of times relative to how our city chooses to do its financial forecast and build its budget. What I really want to say, I wish to very intentionally, I spoke earlier today about using our words and being intentional with our words. I want to very intentionally and respectfully as possible disagree with several things that Mr. Perry said. The first thing is that he mentioned a few extra teachers. We are driven by our enrollment. We are one of exactly one city or town anywhere near here that has rising enrollment. When the state says if you have X number of students, you have to have this many teachers, we have to, especially if they're special ed students, hire more teachers or paras. So it's not simply that we decided, oh, let's just go out and hire some more teachers. In fact, the teachers that we've added to this year's budget, the coming budget, are driven by enrollment. Number two is this idea that we would have to cut $600,000 from somewhere else. In fact, this is the mulberry bush that Bryant, Mr. Ailes and I have gone around so many times. You would not have to cut from somewhere else, but we as a city make a conscious decision to be very conservative in our revenue projections. And so the net result is when the revenue projections come in higher than what we estimated conservatively, then those overages go into the free cash. So that's the 6 of 1. You be conservative on your revenues and then you have free cash. The other is you be less conservative and then you'd have it in your operating budget, but at the end of the year, you wouldn't have it there to put into free cash. So it's how you want to build your budget, how you want to do your forecasting, not whether you have to cut from somewhere else. And the last thing I want to talk about is the very first, idea that Mr. Perry brought up, that we would cut from schools. And I appreciate what you said, Mr. St. Hilaire, because you're absolutely right. It's a $157 million budget, and to just immediately say, well, we need to cut from schools because there's this underlying current, there is a theme that is being proposed that the schools spend too much money, or that we spend as a city too much money on our schools, and because we do that, there's less money available to do other things. There is one pot of money We all know that. We try to talk about not us versus them. And this idea that one side is spending too much money is not a useful conversation to have. And in fact, the quality of our schools drives our home values, and our home values drive our tax base. And so if you think about, oh, let's cut some from the schools, then your schools aren't going to be as good, and you're going to cut your nose off despite your face. So I wish to ask as respectfully as possible for this body to resist any impulse you might have to either embrace or repeat the idea that too much money is being spent on the schools and that we need to cut from the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Visnick. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak in this public hearing? Councilor Houseman?
Yeah.
I will give you a short amount of time because I think we're moving past the time for the council to keep discussing this.
Maybe I misunderstood, and Mr. Perry can certainly decline, but I guess I didn't hear him actually suggest, other than rhetorically, about cutting from the school budget, and maybe I misheard him. Because I don't think that was the suggestion. I don't know if you want to clarify or not. I thought it was a rhetorical if-then, not a suggestion.
Yeah, it was very rhetorical. I was trying to bring to the attention of the 9 of you that if we went to 2.7, we have to cut something. You know, I just said the schools because that's the biggest budget. It's kind of hard to ignore it. I'm going to be fascinated to see what you all do Thursday night and see where you will be interested in cutting, if at all. It was rhetorical. I was not recommending that we cut the school budget. As a matter of fact, kind of the opposite, because I thought the right approach, the administrator, and we talked about this when they were building the budget, was to reduce the roads and sidewalks so we could protect budgets, including the schools. So, but I was trying to make a point that I thought the right thing to do was to go 2.1 and do the free cash as being suggested. That's where I think you should go with it. I'm not recommending or suggesting at all that the schools be cut.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Very quick. I am mindful we have a member of the public waiting for subcommittee, so I think councilors will have a chance to discuss this further when it comes back out. So let's do one quick question. I would like to close this public hearing and move forward.
Great. My question was just on what our projection is for free cash at the end of fiscal year 23 currently.
Assuming approval of this evening, and there's a pending order for 240,000 of free cash that you'll hear on the 26th, assuming approval of that as well. I would estimate that the free cash come in over 8.5, maybe even over 9.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Thank you, Counselor. I'm going to close this public hearing, refer it back to the Committee on Finance and Property, and there will be further action on this tonight. With that, I would entertain a motion to take a break for some committee work.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Let's have Finance and Property here. Legal Affairs will meet in the committee room. And I think you're waiting for Legal Affairs, I believe, so you'll go right through that door right behind you, and Public Services in the hallway, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm calling to order subcommittee on finance and property this June 20th at 9:50. I'd like to take care of some preliminaries first rather quickly. Orders 326, 104, and 165. I believe we can all hold. Those are matters relating to the airport, the capital expenditure plan, and update on the central cemetery. So those are all sort of pending, and we don't need to take any further action on this evening. And then go directly to the donation, order number 173, the donation of $10,000, and take care of that first. That is the donation for the one-stop harm reduction program to help our community impact unit at the police station help respond to drug matters. Councilor St. Hilaire.
I would make a motion that we approve.
Are there any questions or comments on it?
I would second that motion.
Well, in that case, I won't write on this piece of paper.
You can
But
sit, you can give me, I can write on it.
But all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. And that takes us to our transfers this evening. And I'll just take them in the order that I have here. The first is order number 150. This is the transfer request of $75,000 from the Airport Enterprise Fund relating to funding continuation of work for testing and monitoring of hazardous contamination at the airport.
I would make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. The next is order 152, a budget transfer request of $15,000 into the fire department budget to fund FY23 costs associated with the department's operating budget. Are there any questions related to this order?
I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. That's order 152. The next is order 151. This is a transfer request for up to $230,000 in FY23 budget to retroactively fund costs back to July of 2022. This is the result of the GovHR test related to adjustments for the Beverly Municipal Employees Association based upon the salary review. Are there any questions or comments relating to this order number 151?
I'd make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. That leaves us with one remaining item to discuss. This is order number 154, the administration's request for $600,000 to the city's certified free cash to provide additional funding for the city's road and sidewalk paving work for fiscal year 2024. Comments? Councilor St. Hilaire.
So I guess I agree with your comments from earlier tonight in that I'm going to approve this tonight. I think it's the right thing to do. But I will say, you know, I hadn't been connecting the capital projects before us in making a direct line to saying, if we do these, that means we're not going to be able to pave our roads for the next X amount of years. And, you know, if that is the deal, then I think that causes me to look at those capital projects differently, because the road and sidewalk stuff is a priority. So I'm going to approve this, and I'll make a motion that we approve. But those are my comments.
Thank you. Council President, do you have any questions or comments on this?
I think we've had pretty thorough discussion on it in the context of the full council, but I will say that I both appreciate that there is this money that's being put towards the roads and sidewalks, and also can hear and honor the concerns of other counselors that if we don't build it into the budget consistently, and it's really how we think about it. Mr. Ailes, I think, made that point, but how do we think about that where it appears in the budget? For whatever reason, I found it personally helpful as Counselor Rand sort of phrased it, that for her, she's been thinking about it, it's an increase for this year, so then we may be seeing it, as Counselor St. Hilaire pointed out, dollar for dollar, it's a decrease for next year, but it helped me to think about it that way. As she said, possibly semantics may not be the best bookkeeping way to be talking about it, Mr. Ailes, but looking at it that way, it does result in more money to be spent this year in that line item, and that seems like a positive to me.
Yeah. I would, I don't think it bears any further comment by me, so is there a motion then formally to approve?
I made a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. That's order number 154. Unless there is further discussion on the subcommittee, which I don't believe we have anything before us, I will accept a motion to adjourn Finance and Property.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Second. And also in favor.
Yeah. The motion carries 3-0. We are adjourned at 10:56.
I had 10.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll call the full council back to order, and we will go to reports from committees, please.
Order number 173, the Committee on Finance and Property, to whom refer the matter regarding a donation of $10,000 from One Stop Harm Reduction Program via the North Shore Health Project, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this request.
Questions or comments? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0. And with thanks for that donation, which, as we heard from Chief Lasher when he spoke about the budget, anything that can be done to help our city help people who are struggling with addiction is really important. So this is a great donation to receive.
Order number 150, the Committee on Finance and Property, to whom refer the matter regarding a transfer request of $75,000 from the Airport Enterprise Fund balance to fund the continuation of work associated with the testing and monitoring of property at the airport, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this request.
Questions or comments? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0.
Order number 151, the Committee on Finance and Property, whom refer the matter regarding a transfer request of up to $230,000 in the FY 2023 budget to fund retroactive costs back to July 1st, 2022, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this request.
Questions?
230,000, I said, right? Yeah.
Yes, you said it right. Questions or comments on this one? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0.
Order number 152, the Committee on Finance and Property, whom refer the matter regarding a budget transfer request of $15,000 into the Fire Department budget to fund FY 2023 costs associated with the City of Beverly and the Firefighters Union, as well as some anticipated cost overages within the department's operating budget for FY 23, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this request.
Questions or comments on this one? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0. And Chief O'Connor, thank you. I know you've been with us for a long time tonight. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to have a chance to say. I didn't want to knock it. You're good. Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. Thanks for hanging in with us.
Order number 154, the Committee on Finance and Property, whom refer the matter regarding a transfer request of $600,000 from the city's certified free cash balance to be placed into the city's road and sidewalk capital to support paving work for fiscal year 2024, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this request.
Questions or comments on this one? Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. Just a comment that, again, to reiterate what I said earlier, I don't want to support this request right now. I understand the council will likely pass it, and I very much support the spirit behind it. If it were in front of us in January with a whole plan and a report on what had been done so far in the fiscal year with the money that the mayor had put in the budget, I would be a champion of this funding, and I hope that over the next fiscal year we get to that point. So.
Thank you, Councilor Bowen. Any other questions or comments from councilors? All right, the question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And opposed? Thank you. That carries 8-1.
Order number 282, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding a letter regarding accessory dwelling units, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. No further action from the Legal Affairs Committee, and they recommend Order 282 remain on the council agenda as unfinished business, and the City Council request an update from the Planning Department, either in person or in writing at the 6/26 special council meeting.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kent. And so there's no vote to be taken tonight. This is similar to, councilors remember, Councilor St. Hilaire had filed an order at the beginning of our time together, also zoning related, and we were able to carry it under unfinished business from a previous meeting. As we facilitated some conversation on that matter, this is similar in that a singular councilor cannot file a zoning change alone, but will help us to have some of that conversation. Councilor Wren, did you raise your hand as the Chair of Legal Affairs? Sorry, I should have gone to you.
No, it's okay. Thank you. I was hoping that the part of our recommendation was that the council vote to request an update from the planning department for the June 26th meeting, either in writing or in person. So I don't know if that's wrapped into how, logistically, how we vote for it, if that's a separate vote, but that was part of our recommendation.
That makes sense. To make it cleaner, I think, would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Sure, I recommend, I motion that the council requests from the planning department, an update on accessory dwelling units on our, either in writing or in person, on our June 26th meeting.
Thank you,
For
Councilor.
our June 26th meeting, I should say.
Thank you, Councilor Rand. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Any further discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and so we'll make that request to our planning department to receive that update for the 6/26 meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Order number 177, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding a city ordinance, section 240-49, amendment to include a handicap parking space and sign on Bow Street, have considered the matter. Submit the accompanying order and recommend its adoption, and this will go on the regular agenda for the first vote on the 26th.
On the 26th? Okay. So, councilors, that will be for first reading, first vote on the 26th.
Order number 161, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding an appointment for Nathaniel Lewis to serve on the Beverly Planning Board, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this appointment.
Questions or comments? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and thank you to Mr. Lewis for being willing to serve on that board.
Order number 159, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding an appointment for Grace K. Charles to serve on the Conservation Commission, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this appointment.
Questions or comments on that one? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and thanks to Ms. Charles for being willing to serve as well.
Order number 158, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding an appointment for Tara Duffy to serve on the Conservation Commission, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this appointment.
Questions or comments on this one? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and thanks to Tara Duffy as well.
Order number 156, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding a reappointment for Richard Kelly to serve on the Beverly Licensing Board, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this reappointment.
Questions or comments? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you, with our thanks to Mr. Kelly.
Order number 175, the Committee on Legal Affairs, to whom refer the matter regarding an application for a temporary hawkers and peddlers license from Mary Penta, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the license be granted.
Questions or comments? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and that was Mary Penta, who was waiting for subcommittee, so I know she's gone home, but Mary, if you watch later, thank you for hanging in with us.
Order number 157, the Committee on Public Services, to whom refer the matter regarding a reappointment for Stephanie Tallow to serve on the Beverly Council on Aging, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this reappointment.
Questions or comments on this one? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and thank you to Ms. Tallow for being willing to serve.
Order number 160, the Committee on Public Services, to whom refer the matter regarding an appointment for Janice Wonchek to serve as the tenant representative on the Beverly Housing Authority, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the council approve this appointment.
Questions or comments? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0, and thank you to Janice Winchick as well.
Order number 171, the Committee on Public Services, to whom refer the matter regarding a Plan 305-48817 Central Street, have considered said matter and beg leave to follow. Recommend the petition be granted.
Questions or comments on this one? Question comes on the acceptance of the proposal and adoption of the order. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0.
Order number 179, the Committee on Public Services, to whom refer the matter regarding National Grid Plan 307-82870 on Ober Street. Set public hearing on September 5th at 7:30.
Questions or comments? I would entertain a motion to set that public hearing as recommended for September 5th at 7:30.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I'm voting to no.
Just carries 9-0. We don't count Ms. Kent's vote.
I raise my hand.
So that public hearing will happen at our first regular meeting after the summer break, which is the 5th of September at 7:30. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Kent. Councilors, are there any announcements or reminders from the council?
What about the 26th? Could we do the 27th?
So an announcement that, or a reminder, I suppose it's both, is that this Thursday, the 22nd, we will have our chance for our final vote on the mayor's proposed FY24 budget, as we heard discussed earlier this evening. Members of the public are certainly welcome to join us in person or to watch streaming on BevCam with us. And then we will have a special meeting of the council on Monday, the 26th. That was a date being held potentially for additional budget work. Councilors have already heard, but I will just offer a reminder that we will have some additional public hearings. Mr. Ailes referenced other transfers. Those will be discussed that evening. That meeting starts at 6:30, so some of those hearings start in that 6:30 to 7:30 half hour. And then we do have a presentation, sort of long-awaited presentation from the council, or for the council, from the consultant firm that worked with the city on our race equity audit. And so this will be our chance to hear from them, ask questions, and hear some of their recommendations about next steps in implementation. So that will be sort of the largest portion of that meeting. And again, members of the public, welcome to join us in person for those public hearings, but also to stay and hear that important presentation or join us on BevCam. Councilor Crowley.
Sure. Sunday morning at Holcroft Park, we are having a park cleanup. So if anybody would like to join us with rakes and whatever else, we're going to do a complete cleanup and get the park ready for the summer.
Thank you very much, Councilor, and thanks to the neighbors too in that area. I know you've been working hard with them and they're very active. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That carries 9-0. Thanks to Kim in the BevCam booth. We are adjourned.